Okay, and the broadcast button. Oh, first, Lee, can I make you the code? Is that okay?
Yeah, I'll be around for a little while.
All right, close enough.
You see, we don't have much choice tonight, and we got just a few guys here.
They're starting to come in as the bells are ringing.
Yeah, good.
Okay, let me do that. Good, and I've got another button to push now. Yes, this one here. Buttons, buttons, buttons. Never thought I'd be a button pusher. Here I am pushing buttons. Okay, I think I'm done pushing buttons. Let me just double check my button list here. Okay, we got this going, we've got that going. Is this going? Yes, that's going. I have to stop it from going because it'll make noise. There we go. That was the button to push. Okay, I think I'm all together here, and I've got a couple of attendees to bring in first, and then we will begin the show here. And I'm also going to stop the chime. There we go. Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to the Keshe Plasma Reactor Group.
Hello, Rick.
Yes, Chandra?
May I have permission to record, please?
Oh, sure.
It's not bad to have a backup on a local recording.
Yeah, I guess you should be allowed to. I only have forbid record, but I'll make you a co-host as well, and maybe that'll be easier. It'll
Thank
be automatic. Or maybe, yeah. Okay, so let me just mute you there, Shandor, so you don't get the background noise. Okay. Yes, welcome.
Please restart recording, since you made co-host it overtaken. Please start recording on the cloud.
Oh, I guess that's...
Because I started recording on local.
Okay, yeah, I guess it kicks it out, right?
Yes, it's a glitch in Zoom.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
All right, well, that gives it a new start there, I guess, so that's good. Okay, now we're really ready to begin. Welcome, everyone, to the Keshe Plasma Reactor Group for Tuesday. Sorry, it's actually Wednesday in Europe and most of the world right now, so I have to remember to say that. It's Wednesday, September 26th, 2018. In any case, whatever time it is where you're hearing my voice, welcome to this present moment and to today's show. And let me see, I've got a video to play here that I'd like to have a look at. I think we might have seen it before, but I'd like to review it again, which is some of the original tests of during the time of the 129, so-called 129 Tesla tests that were being done at the lab in Italy with Mr. Keshe and team. And this video was from before the actual 129 Tesla. I think they get up to 25 Tesla or something like that. And Mr. Keshe just explains the experiment and what's going on and so on. So it's got some really valuable background information that I'd like to go through again. That's about a half-hour video altogether. But before we get into that, as usual, I will ask if anybody has anything in particular they would like to bring up, especially if you need to leave before the end of the show or whatever. And our presentation or some sort of observation or a question, depending on what the necessity is. And I usually call on Lee Coates at this time, see what he has. Have you got anything for us today, Lee?
I'm just finishing off that home renovation I'm doing, so now I've got time to play again. I was listening to a Michael Tellinger video, his latest one here, and again he was talking about these torus stones and these cone stones and stuff. And I was thinking, what would happen if we made a cone out of nano-coated copper? Whether that would concentrate our plasma energy. We gathered in one end and concentrated at the tip. So something I was going to give a try to.
Yeah, I was just looking for my...
I haven't seen anyone else experiment with nano-coated cones before.
Yeah, well, that's a good idea, actually. Some people, I think, have sort of played with pyramids as an example. I was trying to... Geez, I don't know where that is right now.
But our dynamic reactors, that's like the torus, and then if we had a cone as part of that, or a starship formation with a cone in the middle of it or something, and then put a aluminum plate that's coated with deuterium on top and bottom, like a nano-coated aluminum plate to deflect.
Okay, wait a minute. You're describing as kind of a spaceship configuration. I think we need a whiteboard to have a look at that. How about I put up a whiteboard and you just have a quick sketch and play with it a bit, because it sounds interesting. I think you just laid out a whole bunch of stuff that we maybe have to have a closer look at.
Anyway.
Or do you have something else you want to present in terms of...
No, I'm just talking off the top of my head here because I got nothing to show.
Well, I think that would be interesting. So let's just, for fun, bring up the whiteboard here. Whoops. And I gotta stop annotating in order to get this thing to move. No. All right, what's going on here? There we go. One end. And there's the other end. And now I have to, just bear with me a second while I regroup my annotate board. There we go. And clear. Okay. Do you want to draw on this, Lee, or... Okay, I guess you do. You're going for it, so. Okay, we see blue blobby 1, blue blobby 2, and blue blobby 3, meaning the reactor, star formation reactors. I'm not hearing you.
Yeah, so we got a starship formation going here.
Mm-hmm.
So let's get a different color here. So one idea was to get a cone or something that this would be a... Oops, doesn't want to draw. Oops, I should have drawn a circle. Anyway, that's supposed to be a circle that designated a cone or something in there.
Mm-hmm.
And, the idea was that this, in his Michael Tellinger's talks, he's discovered these ancient tools that they're cone-shaped rocks. I think they're like out of quartzite or some kind of special kind of stone that amplifies sound. And I'm just wondering if we had some kind of a cone in our starship formations that would amplify the plasma energy. But then we'd want something on the to contain this energy, so we could have our aluminum plate that's nano-coated with the deuterium painted on it, so that our the energy fields would be going up, hitting that plate, coming back down and around, and then going back up through the cone, and the cone would amplify it on each circle or something. So, and part of the chestahedron thing I'm playing with still. I'm still, my next project is to do another chestahedron type thing. And there's a 21-degree cone shape that fits inside the chestahedron shape, and I was thinking maybe I'll try and put it in there and see what happens. So.
Interesting. So you thought maybe a nano-coated copper cone might be appropriate?
Yeah, so it would gather the energy in one end and then channel it to the tip of the cone and concentrate it. And the question is, of course, where to point the tip of the cone. One way might be to point it up towards the top ball. So it's sort of, each one of these will have a field. So maybe it'll, that some of it will, go around each of these other balls, but some of it would maybe carry up and into the cone, depending on how the cone was placed in there or something. Or maybe maybe it needs to be just a small cone in the middle instead of one that I got it drawn hanging out the bottom there. These are some things I haven't really thought of yet.
When you mentioned a cone, it occurred to me that there's I was looking for it here. I couldn't find it. I've got it somewhere, but it's evading me right now. It's a double cone coil. So it goes like this and like that, and like that. And it's normally wound with wires, copper wire all the way around like that. And this was it's called the football coil nowadays, but it was what do they call it? It's a bifilar coil, and it's biconical. So it's a special coil that Nikola Tesla came up with. And there's a couple of examples of it on the internet. And he had a way of connecting to it with certain high frequency, high voltage waves and so on, circuits. And it was claimed that this had anti-gravity characteristics. There's something special about this arrangement that he considered, according to the rumors that he said, or I think it was one of his apprentices sort of specialized in this and said that was part of the anti-gravity effects. So in this case, you can see how the inside, let me try a different color here. You can see that the inside, that didn't work. Try a blue. The inside here would be, if you could get a field going in there, or plasma, or whatever gets created, some kind of fields, that it would tend to sort of keep reverberating inside. Perhaps it would be trapped inside this sort of field capturing device. So that's kind of an idea that I have with it. So perhaps with the two inverted cones, like you can imagine this, you know, just turn it 90 degrees and it would be more like that, and with this on the bottom. So it's gives a reflective surface rather than having it all emitting out. It reverberates inside, let's say. Gives it a soul center there, so to speak. So it's an idea anyways. What about a, instead of a cone, a pyramid, or like a, what do you call it, three-sided pyramid that would fit inside the tetrahedral shape? Maybe that would work as well.
Another way might, if Michael Sellinger was right about his those cone-shaped sounds, the idea was they would concentrate the energy and it would come out the tip. Okay, so you're pointing the tips at something. What if we had a series of I don't know, maybe Gantz balls or maybe some kind of dynamic reactor with a series of these cones, and then we could connect them in a circle. So we, you know, they constantly be amplifying each other.
Exactly. Yes.
So,
well, one way that can be done is if you look at that's wrong color. Let's redo. Sorry, undo. Say that's coppery color. Say you have a copper plate, and we talk about nano-coating the plate and so on. There are ways of nano-coating. It'll end up being a black color, so we'll use some black. Ways of nano-coating with copper and creating nanostructures. In this case, one can create little pyramids. So we could have actual nano pyramids instead of just sort of random layers and random, you know, that 30,000 layers may not be perfectly layered. If you look at them, it looks kind of like rough, scaly surface usually by microscope, but it can be regular little pyramids. And if you amplify one of these little pyramids in size to what actually happens with it is for example, with nano-sized gold pyramids like this, they discovered that resonate. They have a natural resonance, and it has a field that kind of goes out. Wrong color again. Let's try. They show pictures of the fields kind of going out from the sides, and the actual tip has a, you know, like you say, it's an emitter. And what happens is they can create a vortex, essentially a toroid donut around these little pyramids. And when they're of the proper size on a gold surface, for example, on a nano-structured gold surface, it is considered to be the best room temperature diamagnetic substance. In other words, it repels a magnetic field. So whereas regular gold surface doesn't tend to do that, it's not known for repelling magnetic fields, but just because of that nanostructure with all these, you know, there'd be another one beside that one and another behind, and so on. This entire structure, and each of those have the donut basically that, and it has to do with both light and sound when you get down to these tiny wee structures that are not quite atomic, but they're way beyond the chemical or biological kind of realm, because we're dealing with small, they aren't single atoms, but there'll be many gold atoms in this case, or in the case of copper, the same thing. They can be trained basically to build themselves, to self-assemble themselves in little pyramid type or cone type structures, depending. Or you can have threads, you can have a forest of threads, you can have all kinds of different structures depending on the exact procedure that makes the nano layers. We have in the Keshe technology, we have a procedure that makes kind of a general wide bandwidth coating that's really a great general purpose, easy to create nano coating that's great for many, many purposes. But it's also possible to have maybe hundreds or even thousands of other exact coatings or layerings created in other ways at the same time. So, and it's something that we could investigate it if, if certain people will get right into nanotechnology, and that'll be their specialty, and they might do their university degree in all the different types of copper nano coating, for example. That would be great. If I was back in university, I would love to get into a project like that. I think it'd be, it's the fastest growing part of science right now, nanotechnology. So it's a big field, and it would be important to make easy, what they call facile processes for doing good things in the world, basically, at a low cost and easy to make and all that kind of thing. So it's a big world available there. Just getting back to this a bit. I think it's called, I think it's called a plasmon is one word. And what are the sound, the smallest, you're finding that when particles vibrate, they make a sound, and the smallest quanta of sound is a phonon, right? I think that's what it's called. Somebody might want to look that up. I could be lying. I think it's a phonon. And then, of course, there's also the photon, which is the smallest, what they call the smallest quanta of light. Not to be confused with the proton, all these P words. Anyway, go ahead there, Lee. Bail me out here. I'm getting too involved in
another idea using these cones is like a dragonfly wing. The wings on a dragonfly aren't big enough to support a dragonfly. Okay, but on the bottom of the wings, there's all these maybe hundreds of little cones, and the ribs on the wing are like hollow tubes, and it's one speculation is the hollow tubes send sound out through the various parts of the wing, and these little cones concentrate the sound energy and give it an energy push down, and that's why a dragonfly can fly and hover and all this kind of stuff. So look back to my my starship formation here. I was going to get a starship formation within a spinning ball. What if I had a little cone inside that spinning ball too, a nano-coated cone pointing down, and then I was going to have these, 4 of these spinning balls in a starship formation, so I'd have the 3 three of these starships spinning in each ball at the base of the big starship. So I'd have three cones pointing down the base, and then plus I'd have another one at the top ball pointing down through the center or something. Anyway, I don't know whether that'll do anything, but it might be fun to try.
Right on. Interesting concept.
That would sort of like the Dragonfly wing with the cones pointing down. So,
how did what's his name? Michael Tellinger, is it?
Yeah.
How did he work in this cone idea into? He had a cone and two plates, or was that part of his design, or something that you were thinking of?
No, he has found hundreds of these cones and torus stones throughout South Africa, and he had a story about it carrying a torus stone on the airport through the TSA or the whatever they are, the security. Actually was in his baggage, I guess, and it got picked up when they checked his baggage before they put it on the plane, and they have to stop the plane and open it. He got him to open his bag, and they said, "Oh, this is just an artifact. This is a stone." He showed them this stone right away, and immediately they didn't search any more in the bag. They just put the stone in the bag, and okay, that's good. Away you go. So obviously the security guys knew something about this type of thing would set their things off. So, because they didn't insist on searching the bag any further. But anyway, that's an idea of that. So he knew that this torus stone was putting out energy, and he also has been looking at various ancient depictions of art, basically from Egypt and other places, where they show various peoples with these cone-shaped stones in their hand or whatever, pointing away. And so and plus I don't know whether he's measured some kind of energy coming off these stones or whatever. But
when you say torus stone, is it a stone that's cut in the shape of a torus, like a donut-shaped stone?
Yes. So they got the torus stones, and then you got the cones, and there's sort of a combination of the two. He's speculating that it was some kind of an ancient tool to do whatever. He's not really too clear on what exactly it does, but
well, they're definitely very basic shapes. As far as three-dimensional shapes, the cone would be sort of basically equivalent to the pyramid. The pyramid being the three-sided pyramid being the most basic three-dimensional shape with sides on it. You can't get any simpler than that. And the same with the cone, as far as it has basically two surfaces, so it's pretty simple. Only a sphere would be simpler, so it would go like sphere, cone, pyramid. So the cone sort of they should have built the pyramids in a perfect cone instead, perhaps. That's where they made a mistake. Yeah. They couldn't figure it out until they were done, unfortunately.
And on this drawing down at the bottom here, the red circles in the cone, we could make the cones out of spirals of wire, and then connect the tip of the one cone to the base of the other to sort of connect them all, so that you're getting a concentration of field energy in that way. That's sort of getting to your idea of the we were using those, I call them pine cones before, and where we had the double-sided cones. We had the starship formation with the two rings of these pine cone type shape cones way back there a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
So,
well, that's an interesting concept for sure.
So
someone needs to put it into practice and see what it does. Okay, well, thanks for spurring our imagination a bit here, Lee. Anything else about that, or any questions, anything that anybody would like to bring up at this point about that? I take that as a no. Okay. Excuse me. What else can we come up with here?
One other thing, this is probably unrelated to anything we want to talk about, but I've been switching my cookware over to cast iron cookware, and today I've been seasoning my about 5 pots. Basically, I'm putting I think what I'm doing is putting a nano-coating on cast iron. So,
well, that's an interesting topic, actually. And it is essentially a nano-coating, or kind of it could even be a GANS coating, depending on how you look at it. But what was your technique that you're talking about in this case?
Well, basically, you put a wipe of thin. Basically, I've sanded this cast iron down to get it nice and smooth for cooking, and so I'm down to bare cast iron. So now I got to season it, and build the nonstick layer back. So basically, you wipe on a thin coat of oil, and then you put it in the oven at a high temperature, which polymerizes the oil, making it hard. And then you do this 4 or 5 times to get the basic season on the cast iron. And basically that polymerized oil, if you get enough layers on it, it turns black.
What kind of oil are you talking about?
Well, I'm using coconut oil, but I mean,
okay.
they use olive oil, flaxseed oil.
Butter works good, actually.
I
found that I found coconut oil was tricky to get a good good coating on the cast iron to start with. It works good afterwards, but it's tricky to get it on to start with because it's it burns at a lower temperature than, say, butter or some other things, and it's different. It's for example, water mixes quite easily with the coconut oil and will take it off. I've seasoned with coconut oil and then have water. If you wash the pan or whatever, it will remove that coating quite easily, and you can actually get corrosion. The rust can come back quite easily, which was surprising to me. Whereas with the butter type process, I find it's more permanent, and I can wash it and it doesn't tend to, the water won't penetrate through so easily. But so you do it like a few times, and
washing it off hasn't been my experience. Once you
right.
You polymerize it, and get it to turn the dark brown or black color. That part doesn't seem to want to be washed off. I mean, if you put a light coating of just plain coconut oil in the pan after you use it, that will wash off. But
I didn't really bake it in the oven like that. That's an interesting way to do it.
Yeah, so you gotta get it in the oven above its polymerization temperature, whatever that. And I'm using 400 degrees in the oven to do that.
400,
coconut oil polymerizes at about between 300 and 375. So that puts it above that. So that.
Does it make a lot of smoke? Is it
not too bad? I open the door just to get a little bit of the. It does kind of have some smoke come off at that temperature, but that's what you want. that's why I say. That's why I say nano-coating it.
Yeah, it's an interesting process. And also, if you look at the process that occurs when, for example, say you're simmering some sugary substance, a syrup, to melt down syrup or something, or say some berries to warm them up from frozen, or to make some sort of warm concoction. And when you forget and the burner stays on and the water boils away and that sugary substance burns itself onto the cookware, it is an incredibly tough nano coating. I've tried to, you know, once it's embedded in, it doesn't chip off. It you have to actually sand it off, and even then, it's embedded into the little cracks and crevices that are hard to sand off. And I'm amazed how tough that coating can be. And it makes me realize that certain combinations of maybe certain nanomaterials, certain ganses, and a bit of sugar and couple other things, and bingo, you can have an actual melted, burned on, embedded nano coating to your specification, and it would be very difficult to remove. So that's something to think about as well.
Okay, that's all I've got.
Alrighty, no pictures of burnt pots, eh? We'll just have to do with our scrawlings here. Thanks for the picture and the inspiration there, Lee. And okay, let's carry on. Anybody else here have something they'd like to bring up? Shall I clear the whiteboard? And Lawrence, you have something you'd like to say or bring up? Draw, perhaps? Anybody else? No willing drawers, eh? No artists in the group tonight that are ready to go. Let's check my chat here. Oh, I see attendee Mario. I've got a bunch of attendees. Sorry about that. Let me promote you all to panelists here so we can all be on the same level. And one more. There we go. Okay, Mario, was it you that wanted to make a drawing?
Well, yeah. Hey, Rick. You know, for me, it was last night. I guess for you, it was this morning. The Caroline's. Yeah, I got cut off on the internet last night and could not get back on and kept getting cut off and everything. So hopefully I'm okay for now. I guess you can hear me okay, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. You know, this thing that Lee's drawing here with the cones, and he mentioned about I call them Armin's egg reactors. There's an interesting thing about it that I noticed years ago, that if you take the cone, if you take the egg reactor, you know what I'm talking about, the pine cone reactors, right? It's a spiral, it goes out and gets bigger and then gets smaller, and you put one inside the other, right? If you do that on a straight trajectory, you get these cones, and it'll be like a pine cone or whatever. If it gets bigger and then gets smaller again. But if you do that on a curved trajectory, you get the Keshe Foundation logo, which is very interesting. But you need to do something else. So maybe if I can draw on this here, let me see, annotate. Give you an idea that instead of having the cone just going on a straight line, you have it doing something like this, coming back around on itself, getting smaller, and then linking back up. That's a bad version of it, right? But if you imagine that you have one of them, there's a river of energy, so to speak, vortexing, but it curves. So as it gets farther away from the center, it gets larger. And then as it gets to a certain mass, it starts to come back around on itself, and it gets smaller and smaller and smaller and joins back up again, right? But if you imagine that you have one, say, going in a counterclockwise direction from its perspective, going, say, from the left to the right, the way I just drew that. But then you have another one that's also going counterclockwise from its perspective, the way it's spiraling, but going in the opposite direction. So going around in this way. Let me change the color maybe. You have another one that's going around this way. I'm doing this the wrong way, but like this, and this, and this. You see, they loop around each other and create a ball, a bigger ball, a smaller ball, like that. So when you put the two together, you get a ball, you get the Keshe Foundation logo. See? And what I noticed, there was something called the ancient Greeks call it the ancient navigator's wheel, that has one of these like this. And then, of course, if you do it the other way around, they close in on each other, so to speak, and you get, and so there's one on this side and one on that side, and you get your classic figure 8 infinity loop. And I realized that if you look at that and you have one inside the other, so you have another one here that's doing the same thing, like the egg reactor, you put one inside the other, and then another one and another one and another one and another one. You have 8 layers of that, say. You get this very interesting structure. And if you look at it, that's one figure 8, but you have another one that's doing this, and another one that's doing that, and you have 12 of those. You get a really, really complex structure of a magnetic field. And you always will get these layers. You'll get the layer here. I'll change the color. You'll get a layer here, and a layer here, and a layer here, and so on. And so you get your flower of life and the ball inside a ball, inside a ball, inside a ball. And it's the Keshe Foundation logo, which is really the most interesting version of the flower of life, right? Because normally you don't do all this spiraling in both directions and all that. You just do one of these, yeah? And, like this, and so on. And another one. And something interesting, I watched, I actually took my own advice again. I watched that Nicholas's presentation again last week, I guess. And Mr. Keshe, it's amazing. Every time I watch those, I've watched it so many times. Every single time I watch it, I learn stuff I didn't, there's stuff there I missed the last time around, after 10, 15 times watching it, But Mr. Keshe said something really interesting. Well, he always says something interesting, but he said directly to Nicholas, he said, what I say isn't always what people hear. That's a pretty profound thing if you think about it. What I say isn't always what people hear. Because we interpret, I guess, and we put together with what we already know. And so it's easy to misinterpret what Mr. Keshe is saying based on our own backgrounds. So, again, it helps to go back and watch those earlier teachings and stuff. But if I can show you something here, this is what Mr. Keshe calls a plasma. That is magnetic fields in a container. So you have these fields, but the container is where these field lines cross. So if I change the color again, like in this bad drawing here, and here, and here, and well, I don't even have the right number of them, but you get the idea that you have these places where they cross. That's this is where life is. You have this opening in the center, and then you have these fields radiating out. Now, the way I understand this, that center is we would call a neutron, and that divides, and it divides by shooting out its energy. All of its mass gets radiated out. In Mr. Keshe's first book, he goes into details on how they shoot out as rays and then they coalesce, so to speak, and he goes through the whole procedure. So that, but in the flower drawings, the flower presentation of Nicholas, Mr. Keshe makes it a point to call them the 12 apostles. So, and even though Nicholas had only drawn 6 circles, Mr. Keshe kept calling it the 12 apostles. So, in other words, I mean, my understanding would be they coalesce and you have 12 rivers of energy radiating out. And it's beating like a heart. At the center, or is a heart. In other words, Mr. Keshe also calls these plasmas energy packages. So energy is motion. So if you have a beating, that's a particular type of motion, not just any motion. It's contracting and expanding, right? So in a way you could call that, I mean, it's fractal. So, you know, as above, so as below. So you could, what applies at one level also applies in other levels as well. But you can in a way call that the yin yang, that it contracts, and that'd be the gravitational, and then it expands, and that's the magnetical interaction. So you have this yin yang, but like your heart, you have the arteries attached to it. So you have these rivers of energy that are getting thrown out and flowing in a specific direction. So it's literally like an artery. So in here, if I put a different color so you can see, you have from the air, the direction of the flow, this will go around in one direction and continue back in. And at a point here at 50% of the mass, if this is a perfect circle, which is not, of course, but that would be half of the mass. And then it returns its trajectory. So here you have an artery, and then you have the vein coming back in, right? And that's true for each of these. So when you have one that's going out this way, say in this direction, then you will have another one going out in this direction in a mirror image of it. So you have another version of the yin yang, but then you also have these rivers of energy. So here you have this beating like a heart, squeezing out its mass into these rivers of energy. So you have a motion of a yin yang with a gravitational and magnetic, but then you also have the feng shui with the flow of the energy in a specific direction. And so you'll have this many of these. Now, in a standard default, at the half point here would be half its mass. And so wherever you interact with it, you will interact with that much mass. So where these red dots are in this one over here, that there's going to create a little baby born right here. That's the essence of creation. Pokes that hole in the universe.
Mario?
Yep.
Come in, Mario. We're missing your audio, or at least I am here.
Ah, okay. My internet connection is really bad.
Oh, they're back again now. I hear you again.
Just you, Rick.
Okay. I don't know how much. Okay. So did you get the yin yang and feng shui? Did you hear that? Okay.
Yeah, it was just the last sentence or so.
Okay. Yeah, maybe my internet is really bad here. And anyway, okay. With
clear.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So where these red dots are little holes in the universe where baby neutrons are, and they divide as well. And so you get, your Coulomb barrier here, where these are butting up against each other. And that's what creates the skin. So now you have your plasma based on the position of these. But where the red dots cross, it's the mass, the difference of the mass of the two fields crossing. So at any position, when you get halfway around, that would be half the mass. And continuing on. So at this position here, it'd be 25% of the mass, 50% of the mass, 75% of the mass, and so on. There's also the rivers of energy are pulsing like your blood does. So in other words, you're going to get a squeezing and the flow is going to get pushed forward. And then when the heart expands, it's going to slow down, even have a retrograde motion going backwards a little bit, and then get pushed again forward. So there's a pulsing. And we've seen these in the in GANS buckets and stuff lots of times where you see the rotation and it pulses. And Mr. Keshe always say, that's the heartbeat. So you're actually seeing this pulsing. This is actually exactly the way the planets move around the Earth from the Earth's perspective. They pulse. They go forward, they slow down, they go backwards a bit, then they go forward again. They do exactly the same thing. Now, there's a pulse rate also, but I think what's happening, this part here, what I just say, that's directly from Mr. Keshe's teachings, and you can see it in your own arteries and veins that you have this pulsing. But what I think is happening, mostly probably because this is not just a river energy, it's vortex. It's spiraling around and getting bigger. And there's a shock absorber effect, I think, is what's happening. Meaning from the central core here, where it's beating, we'll have a certain heartbeat rate. And the more mass that it's pushing against, there's a shock absorber effect. I think it slows down the pulsing, that the farther away it is from the heart, the slower the pulse rate is until you get here to the 50% mark. That would be 1/2 of the mass. And I think it's also 1/2 of I think it's also 1/2 the pulse rate. So that would be what we would think of as a perfect octave. That is the heartbeat rate 2 to 1 or 1 to 2 based on the amount of mass. And then it speeds back up again and closer to the heart until it gets back to a 1-to-1 ratio. In other words, I think you have a spectrum of mass and a spectrum of heartbeat rates based on the pulsing. So wherever you interact with it, you're going to get the difference of that mass and the difference of that heartbeat rate will be equal to the heartbeat rate and the mass of each baby that's formed. If that makes sense, right? The reason I'm bringing that up is because if you had an interaction at the halfway mark, then you would get a perfect octave. That would be a mirror image of the original heartbeat rate. And when you have that, there's another factor that's the feedback loop that means there's an increase in amplitude for the second generation of fields that are going to come out of this. And you use the position of where they cross. So in other words, like for example, here, this would be the outer circumference of this egg here. But when you measure the feedback loop, you don't use the outer circumference, you use where the interaction happens as the radius for the next generation of fields. So if you had that here and you had an interaction at half point, you would get half the mass, half the heartbeat rate, and that would be the radius of the next generation of circles. So you would get another, the diameter would be equal to the radius of the next layer, which means the next layer would also be half the mass and half of the heartbeat rate and half the mass, half the heartbeat rate. In other words, every layer would be a perfect octave. So it would be like having a piano where you have the highest notes in A, and the next note down is an A, an octave lower, and the next note down is another A, and they're all A's. Or if it's light, you would see white light because it's all just bouncing back and forth off each other. Everyone's exact copy of each other. But you don't have that because what you do have is the next layer is, these fields, they cross like, this one crosses, wow, I keep losing they cross here, not at the halfway mark. So it doesn't quite, so it crosses not at the octave, it'll cross at, say, the note G, or it might be the color blue. So instead of having all the same note, all the same white light, you have an offsetting. So you have this blue color or a note G. And because this becomes the diameter or the radius of the next generation, then when you have the next generation of fields, that will be the diameter. It won't be exactly twice the diameter. And then you'll have the offset of the next layer. Oh, I keep losing my. You get the next layer. So now you have the same phenomenon happening here. From this perspective, this node will be a step lower. And then from this perspective, this note will be a step lower. So you're going down the 7 colors of the rainbow or down the 7 notes of the scale. You're getting harmony. Does that make sense? So that the variety happens, not because you have a different phenomenon. In other words, if you have a plasma here, where I put the green, that's a plasma. It's no different than any other plasma. It's the same thing as the total structure. If it's here, it's a plasma. There's no difference. They're just magnetic fields in a container. But when you compare it relative to this central core, if it's here, then its relative difference is an octave. If it's over here, its relative distance might be a whole step down to a G. Or instead of just white light, white light, white light, it's a blue. But again, it's relative to this position. Without this, a plasma just by itself is an A note or a white light. It has no definition. It can't confirm its own existence, so to speak, the way Mr. Keshe would say. It's the fact that where this interacts here is offset. There's a certain ratio from the central core that gives it what we would see as a color blue, or here as a whole step down. It's a comparison, if that makes sense, right? So everything's relative. There's no absolute values about any of this. It's just our perspective. To another entity, what they see as we see as a blue, they might not see as a blue because we're tuned to hydrogen. So our amino acids are tuned to hydrogen. So that's what this central core is. So to us, when something interacts at this position, it's the color blue or the note G, or it's an oxygen or a plutonium or whatever. But to another entity that's not tuned to this same plasma here might be green or might be white or might be, brown or red or whatever. Does that make sense? It's our interaction with it that gives it its perspective, that gives it its position. Without the interaction, we're tuned to this, so that's a G. The next layer is an F. The next layer is an E, or it's blue and then whatever, green, and then the colors of the rainbow, like that, going outwards. Yeah? I don't know. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay.
It's a little hard to comprehend because, we're talking about concepts here. What do we tie it into? You talk about plasma. What would be a practical example of these interactions, and how would we see that in different ways and so on?
Well, okay. Well, first, for example,
first, maybe we should go to a bigger drawing, because we've all focused on this center thing here, and for people on an iPhone, they won't even see any of the scrollings that happened in the last half hour, because it'll be so small on the iPhone. So maybe let's just start with a new screen, but make a mental picture, and let me clear. Okay, let's start from scratch and scratch away.
Okay.
Make your picture big so that even the kids at home can see it.
Yeah, okay. I'm not using my glasses too, so I can make it bigger. Okay, you have the neutron. So it divides by squeezing its energy and outwards. It divides itself into 12 rivers of energy. So you have a river of energy is going around like this, river of energy is going around like that. And so this one will have a direction of flow. That way, this one will go like that. And each one of these will have their own direction of flow. And there'll be 12 of these, or 6 figure eights, right? So you have the yin yang with the contracting and expanding, and the feng shui, or the river flow direction. And it's literally a heartbeat, or a heart and an artery, and then at some point it becomes a vein. Does that make sense, right? So at this point, it's...
Okay, you're talking about the heartbeat of the neutron here. Is that what you're saying?
That's right. Right. It's going to squeeze and like I think of it like a water balloon that, you know, you just squeeze and all the water goes shooting out in every direction. And they coalesce and you get these 12 rivers of energy. Right? Now,
I don't know. I never heard of the 12 rivers of energy before. I never heard that.
Well, Mr. Keshe kept talking about the 12 apostles. When in other words, in his book, he talks about how the neutron divides into these rays, magnetic rays, and then they coalesce into fields of rays, and so on. And then when one interacts with another that are different enough. So in other words, you have this. It's a flow. It's a flow of energy. It's a river of energy. Mr. Keshe called them rivers of energy, and it's literally a heartbeat. Your heart doesn't just contract and expand. It's literally pushing the blood around in your system. So you have both two kinds of motion there. You have the contracting and expanding of your heart, and you have the flow of the blood from the arteries going around. When they get to a half point, they return trajectory and come back in. Right? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what you have. You have a heart, and you have an artery and a vein, and an artery and a vein. And why there are 12, I don't know, but Mr. Keshe kept bringing that up in that Flower of Life presentation of Nicholas, 12 apostles. Now, it could be metaphorical that, in fact, the Flower of Life is a standard default, which I don't think anything in the universe is standard default. But the concept of it, if you just look at the standard default and you understand that, then when you look at the variations, you see all these, how there are variations of the theme, so to speak. So, but there's a reason why Mr. Keshe calls it the 12 apostles, because you always have one Judas that brings an imbalance. And that's really important. That's why I'm making up the point that where you interact with it, just like Mr. Keshe says, see, these are actually spiraling, like the egg reactor, so to speak, going around and coming back in. But if you just look at it as a straight river of energy, wherever you interact with it, here or here or here, wherever, you're interacting with a certain amount of mass that's getting pushed in the river. So the difference, when you interact with it at this point, you're interacting with a different mass than you would be if you're interacting with it at this point, right? And also the pulse rate of it. I think that also slows down, gets to the halfway mark and starts to speed up and speed up. That may or may not be true, but certainly there's a pulse rate to the flow. It gets pushed forward, slows down, comes back a little bit, gets pushed forward, and continues around like that. So where you interact with it, you're interacting with that much mass and that heartbeat rate at that position. And the difference between that mass and that heartbeat rate and the mass and the heartbeat rate of the other entity interacting, like, for example, this, another one here. So if you're interacting with it here, you're interacting with this much of the mass of this much of the mass of that, and the heartbeat rate at this position for this one and the heartbeat rate for the other one. And that will dictate the structure of this one. If that makes sense now, right? It's where you interact with it. Just like Mr. Keshe is always saying with the spiral. You interact with it here, you have gold. You interact with it here, it's plutonium. It's exactly the same thing here. You're getting a plasma based on the difference of the two fields interacting. But you have to have an interaction. If you don't have an interaction here, then if this is gold, that would be gold, but you're not interacting with it there. You're interacting with it over here, so you get lead, or you get an oxygen, or you get a whatever. In this case, we're just talking about in the basic premise of how the Coulomb barriers dictate the position of a radius where you have so many, oh, I keep losing the pencil there. Where you have this flower of life and you have these interacting here, as opposed to the outer circumference, it's an offset. And this gives a variety of everything, because if it wasn't offset, so you get a Coulomb barrier with the circumference here, as opposed to on the outer area, right? It's offset. That's an interesting thing because it dictates the position of the next layer as well, right? So far, Rick, do you follow that? It makes sense, or?
Well, it makes sense in a kind of a theoretical way. Sure, I could sort of, I can see the interaction of the fields being the forming the Coulomb barrier and so on. But you mentioned the mass interacting and the difference in mass of the, what is the mass that you're talking about? That's the masses that are, I thought it's
okay.
Fields that are interacting and not mass. So I'm a little confused there.
Well, I mean, the amount of energy that's in the, like how much blood is from the heart rate to a point to where you're interacting with it. In other words, if I just draw one circle like this, the flow is going in one direction. So you're interacting, if you interact with it at this position, you're interacting from this point, you're interacting with this much of the flow. It's a river of energy. If you're at the top of the stream, you're interacting with so much of it. If you're interacting with it here, you're interacting with more of the river of energy because it's still flowing. So at each position, relative to the position of heart, you have 100% of the mass of the energy in the river going all the way around. So at this point, you're interacting with half of it. So this is pushing with half of the force of the river, as opposed to here, 3/4 of the force. Right? Just like,
yeah, I don't understand that part. And
well, okay, you have
you're talking about mass, and then you're talking about energy, and you're interchanging both of them, and I just get.
Well, when I say mass, I mean the amount of stuff that's there. It's all energy to me. It's a river of energy. So it has mass and it takes up space in the environment. This structure will push itself out like a balloon and press up against the environment. And it can go out so far and no farther based on its mass relative to the environment. So it takes up space and it has mass. It has a certain amount of energy in it. No different than 10 milliliters of CO2 as opposed to 100 milliliters of CO2. You're generating, you not only have more of the gas material, but you're generating a higher density mass field of energy. There's more energy in 100 milliliters than in 10 milliliters. Not just more gas material, but more energy in the fields, right? No? Don't see that?
Well, it depends on, I mean, it kind of makes sense, but it's sort of like if an inch of chrome is good, is a foot of chrome better? Is a small container of GaNs works? Is a larger, bigger container going to make any more positive difference? Is it going to be stronger, better, and so on? Should we, what's the...
Well, okay. Well, it'll fill the container. It'll fill the container. So a plasma will fill the container, no matter how much. In other words, the diameter of the totality of the field itself at its outer Coulomb barrier, because there's a Coulomb barrier inside a Coulomb barrier inside a Coulomb barrier. When that fills an environment, that environment's creating the field has got a certain diameter to it, right? I mean, John has measured the diameter. In fact, most people have measured the diameters of the fields, and they can tell the layers as well. So there's a certain diameter to the fields equal to its mass relative to the environment. If you take the same mass and put it in a different environment where there's more plasmatic pressure, then the diameter of the whole field will be smaller. If you put it in a less pressure environment, then the diameter of the field will be larger, right? But once it enters like the Earth's environment, then if it's a hydrogen atom, it's got a certain amount of mass and it takes up a certain amount of space. If you take that hydrogen atom into a less dense environment, it'll open up and it'll be the same amount of mass, but a larger volume, just bigger. Same balloon, just blown it up bigger because the fields in the environment are not pressing up against it as much. See, this is the unicos, in a way, is one giant plasma. It's, in a way, one hydrogen atom filling the entire universe, the unicos. The only question about the unicos is what's containing it. Mr. Keshe has talked about that. What's containing it? And you never have life unless you have one field interacting with another field that's independent of the actual entity that's formed. The entity is born of the difference of the fields scraping against each other and balancing each other out and spraying out the sawdust, so to speak, if you're drilling a hole. That's that. But who's the mother and father of the unicos? Now, Mr. Keshe has said even he doesn't know that, but he's got a theory. So, I mean, I'm not even going to speculate on what Mr. Keshe's theory about that is. But everything within the structure of the unicos is like its flower of life. Once that neutron divides, it's creating life when they have one river of energy crossing another river of energy and creating these babies. And they will create a Coulomb barrier. And so what you have is this, like I have some drawings of the Coulomb barrier. It's actually a lattice structure. If I draw the flower of life right on each of these positions, they cross each other and create this sort of lattice, crystalline lattice type structure here, which, in other words, the fields themselves are creating the container. They're going out, they're crossing, they're creating this sort of a membrane. It's a membrane structure. That's the shell. So you have the soul, the yolk, that's divided its energy. You have these rivers of energy crossing, going out, crossing, creating this lattice membrane structure here. That's the shell. So you have your egg, right? And it's where they cross relative to each other is how much of the energy is the difference between the energy of this field and, I keep losing that. And another one that's going out like this. At this position is where you get your baby there. So wherever that is, if I have one that's here and another one that's there, then this is where you'll have, oh, it should have been like this. Then this would be where they cross. So it depends on where they're crossing that gives you the relative heartbeat rate and the relative mass of the entity. This is why, well, look what I can do with this structure. If I have, okay, do like this. It should be like that. And this one like this. I'll just do 6 of these. Now imagine that's the soul of the earth. If where these are crossing, this would be the Coulomb barrier. Here, this where they're crossing. Where you have above that is the atmosphere. You have the troposphere, right? So here's the actual circumference of the Coulomb barrier of the earth. So to say, all these fields that are, sorry, excuse me, all these fields that are radiating above it are the atmosphere of the earth, right? But now, if the earth decides to filter the fields, so you can have one here, put another one here, and another one here. Okay, see, they're basically in balance, where this one's in balance with that one's in balance with that one. If this one's in balance here, then it has a radius here. If you have 12 of these, but you have one apostle, one Judas, that imbalanced, not in balance, then what it's going to do is it's going to create, it's going to not go on a straight diameter, or say it's going to go off on a diameter like this. So this one's going to interact there. So it's going to create a different position where it's interacting. So now if I did this right,
why does the, or how or why does the 13th come in again?
Not
like
the 13th, not the 13th, the 12, one of the
12
one of
is
the 12.
Where does the next one, where does the imbalance come in? I missed the imbalance part, I guess.
Well, I didn't draw it very well, so let me see if I can draw it better here. Oh, let me do this a better way. All right. I should use actual circles, but all right. You have perfect figure eights that are in balance with each other, mirror images of each other. So you have another one here. Oh, it should be like that. And another one here. See, they're mirrors of each other. So if you have another one here, but then you have, this one is not a mirror image, it's offset, it's refracted slightly. Then what happens is this one will not be a perfect figure eight, it'll be offset. So where this one, the diameter will be straight through those. This one, the diameter is straight through that. This one, the diameter goes like this, or the radius rather, and then it goes up like that. That's all it would take. It repositions the Coulomb barrier. So what you end up with is something like this, where this is crossing, but then it goes in and the Coulomb barrier comes out like this. So you're redirecting the position of the Coulomb barrier. Does that make sense? So now you have not a perfect circle, but this, I'll draw it with a different color. So now you have, wow, my drawing is so bad. Maybe I can do it with circles. Yeah. Okay, another one. Oh. Yeah, but I don't know how to move that. Oh, I don't know how to use this. Boy. Well, let me.
Yeah, the circle tool is a little bit awkward for sure.
Yeah, and drawing it freehand. Well, okay. In other words, where these are crossing, that should be better. They're in balance in a standard default. But because the RNA of the Earth or the information or it just decides, all it has to do is move one of these so that it repositions the Coulomb barriers where they're crossing. That'll give you a different mass and a different heartbeat rate. So, okay, change the color. So you have, in a standard default, you would have it more or less creating a perfect circle. But if I rebalance one of them where it's offset to a different position so that it crosses in a different place, so that now you have it crossing here and say down here somewhere, so that when you get your Coulomb barrier, it's going to be not a perfect circle. It'll go in and out. So in a way, you could say that's the beginning of my Pacific Ocean there, right? And the radius of the next layer is dictated by the position of the Coulomb barriers. So when you have the next layer, that one's going to be the diameter of that one. This one's going to be the diameter of that one. And this one's that one. And this one's that one. This one's that one. But this one's much smaller. That dictates another position for the next layer of Coulomb barriers, where it's here and then way out there and then way in the normal position here. So what's happening is you're repositioning the Coulomb barrier. So if I find another color, black. When I have my next layer, I'm getting even more of an indentation here. And because these are interactions between these Coulomb barriers, this drawing is so bad, it's really hard to tell what's going on, but the difference between here and here, and here and here, and here and here, let's say that's iron. But when you've shifted this Coulomb barrier, the difference between, say, this one and this one is maybe the field strength of water, and the difference between this one and this one is salt. So by shifting the position of the babies, where these entities are, these plasmas, it's the same thing as having a zinc plate here and a nanocopper here. You get in between there the field strength of CO2. Just by shifting the position of the Coulomb barrier, you're not only shifting the position of the Coulomb barrier itself, creating an indentation where the Pacific Ocean would be, and over here is the Rocky Mountains, over here is the Himalayas, so to speak. You're also shifting the position of what's in between these, because this is no longer the field strength of iron to iron. It's now something that the difference is gold. And over here, the difference here is, coal. And over here, now you've shifted the position. Every time you shift the position of these, you're changing its field strength, right? So now you're creating, and if you have a Judas in every layer, that's only one layer. I could put an Atlantic Ocean doing the same thing over on this side. By shifting this Coulomb barrier, this one's offset, and it creates a Coulomb barrier that goes in here, and the difference between here and here is salt, and the difference between here and here is water, and you get salt water over here, you get salt water over here. And they don't even have to be exactly the same salt, just near enough. And so you get salt water here, and a Pacific Ocean, salt water here, and an Atlantic Ocean, you get the Himalaya Mountains, the Rocky Mountains over here, just because you're shifting the position of the Coulomb barrier, right? And in between these, you're getting different field strengths. So you're getting water and salt and coal and oil and all the rest of that based on these position of these layers. So if you have maybe 128 layers of this, that's how many I think is in the standard default plasma, then already with 2 layers, I can set up a Pacific Ocean and Atlantic Ocean, have salt water, have gold and coal and iron and all these things. Imagine if you have 128 layers to play with, right? I don't know if that you follow that, if that makes sense at all.
Yeah, it does actually.
Yeah, the drawing is pretty horrifically terrible. It's hard to see here, but yeah, that's the way it's going. And the RNA or the central core, see, all of these fields, they're magnetic fields. They're what we traditionally called magnets. Now we call them maggrav. And we know it's not just iron magnets, it's everything is a magnet. They store energy. They store information. They remember everything. They remember everything. This could be like, in other words, I think of it that the central core is like the hard drive on your computer that's got the database of every ancestor you've ever had. And it's not just their memories, it's everything about their experience, the emotions, the smells, the feel, the taste. It's all in the hard drive in our RNA. But once this neutron manifests itself in our environment, then it radiates out its fields. It's like the RAM on your computer. It's the short-term memory. It's like opening a new file. So you now have where we store the information is in these transition periods. Mr. Keshe calls these the emotions. These are our emotions. They're transition because in this river of energy, it's not interacting with anything until it comes to this position. So it's in transition. But in the transition is where we're storing all of our memories. It's from a time of our inception. It's all being stored here and over here and being stored over here and so on. And these memories, I think of them as diverting the rivers of energy. And all you need to do is send one of these for each layer. All you have to do is send one of them off in a slightly not a perfectly balanced, figure 8. All you have to do is divert it. I put a little bit of information in the year at this place based on my RNA or based on a decision. Maybe the soul of the earth decided, I think I want, gold over here. Okay, so it rediverts the field in just such a way to create an interaction where you get this here and this here as opposed to where it would normally be. Change the field strength, you get your salt water and you get your gold happening here between that kind of thing, right? This is exactly the same thing as like, instead of this being a cavern or a basin for the Pacific Ocean, it could be the abdominal cavity of the human body. And this is the liver, where the liver is going to be. And so this position here and this position here, say, is creating a field strength that's going to be what your liver is going to be born here. And that explains why Mr. Keshe said the surgeon can go in and remove the liver, but assuming you survive the operation, which you probably wouldn't, but the liver, because the liver only manifests itself because of the interaction of these, where the Coulomb barrier are. What this field strength is and what this field strength is, the difference from those is your liver. And that's got its own RNA and it's doing its own thing and it's creating its own shape of the liver and doing the same thing. But if you remove the liver, it'll just grow back, right? But what Mr. Keshe is talking about, not about the liver, but about when the surgeons remove part of the femur or with brain damage, when they remove part of the skull. In other words, if the surgeon doesn't just take the liver out, he takes out part of this here and cuts it out. So now you've repositioned the Coulomb barrier. So this one's now not there. It's over here. Now you have a problem. See, because you've changed the position where that's no longer the correct field strength for the liver. So it's a lot more difficult when the surgeons remove part of the skull, they're repositioning the Coulomb barrier that's actually creating the brain, so to speak, right? Well, okay. I think I muddied up the waters enough for now, maybe.
Well, we have a question for you. Jedi mentions why 128? Why 128 layers you remember?
Boy, there's a lot of reasons.
How'd you come to that number?
Yeah, there's a number of reasons, but okay. What I think is you have a Coulomb barrier inside a Coulomb barrier inside a Coulomb barrier, and if you go out 128 layers, what will happen is each layer is based. The harmonic overtone series is the ratios of the plasmas, their heartbeat rates. And what I realized, if the center core is 128 beats, I keep losing mine, 128 beats, then the second layer is going to be 1 beat slower. So this one's going to be 127. Also, the amount of the mass, in other words, this radius, this is...
Wait a minute, why 1 beat slower?
It's just
a ratio slower rather than
one right. Yes, 1 heartbeat rate slower, 1 pulse rate slower. That goes all the way out, so that if you started here at the outer layer, the first layer would be 1 heartbeat rate, the second layer would be 2 to 1, 3 to 1, 4 to 1, 5 to 1, right up to 170, 127 to 1, 128 to 1. It's just the way it does. But also, there's a certain...
wouldn't it be in harmonic ratios? You're always talking about harmonics. Like, wouldn't
those
it be
are the harmonic ratios. Those are the harmonic ratios. 1, 2 to 1, 3 to 1, 4 to 1, 5 to 1. That's the harmonic overtone series.
And then it goes up to 7, but you don't have 9 to 1, do you?
Yeah,
but
no, you have
it 3 again,
no,
or some
in principle, it goes to infinity. It continues into infinity in principle. And when I say 128, it's fractal. So it's like 7 days of the week. What happens at the end of the 7th day? The universe doesn't end. You start another 100, another 7 days, right? But they go in patterns. But the reason I call it 128, there's a few reasons for that. But look at it like this. When this river of energy divides out its mass, 100% of its mass is divided out. Yeah. But it diverts some of the mass, some of the energy to create this Coulomb barrier. So when it comes back in, the next generation has slightly different amount of the energy left in it for it to create the second generation of fields radiating out from the inside out. So the mass gets slightly smaller as well. Each layer has a little bit less of the mass. So the first layer is a 128 to 1 amount of the energy, mass of it. The next layer is 127 parts. The next one's 126, right down to 1. But there's another phenomenon that, the heartbeat rates. If you look at the heartbeat rates, if I have 128, half of that would be an octave. And octaves are the anchoring points that confirm the existence, so to speak. So half of that would be 64. So that means there's 62 different layers in between that have their own heartbeat rate. So you're dividing an octave into 64 parts, so to speak. So you have 128 to 64. If you half that, it's 32. If you half that, it's 16, then 8, then 4, then 2, then 1. That's 7 octaves down. Okay, that's the human hearing range. That's the range that I plotted all the elements. I think that's our bandwidth, right? And if you add the first layer, if I call that an A, and I add the last layer, there'll be 8 A's, so to speak. So there's 8 copies of the original, right? They're in 7 octaves because you had the last capstone, so to speak, right? So which means there are 8 A's, but then only 7 B's, 7 C's, 7 D's. They all have confirmations of their own existence. There's only 7 of those. So that's why the container is the unicots. There's one more of that. There's more of that mass than any other, right? But there's another thing that's happening as well. So you have this, there's a slightly less mass. There's 128 parts mass, 127 parts mass, right down to 1/128th of the mass at the lower level. And I'm not thinking about it as just units of measurement. So the less mass there are in each layer, the slower the heartbeat is relative to the central core, right? Then, but there's another phenomenon, the flow rate, because you have the heartbeat rates of each of the layers, but you have the field flow rate of the arteries, how fast they're flowing relative to each other. And this is something that's really interesting that I think I understand. I saw somebody in the chat say that it's not the harmonic overtone series. Yes, actually it is. Sorry to disagree with you, but trust me on that. That's my field of expertise. It's definitely the harmonic overtone series, 2-to-1, 3-to-1, 4-to-1, 5-to-1. It's the ancients used those ratios to give us our calendar. The Fourier equation for the harmonic overtone series is the same equation that the ancient Babylonians used to plot the position of the sun, moon, stars, and the planets, right? They recognize that these are the same ratios. And I don't know exactly how they went about doing it, but they gave us our 12 months. Mr. Keshe said this is where we got the 12-hour clock, right? The 12 apostles, the 12-hour clock, the 12 constellations. Anyway, there's another thing. Okay, but look at something else. If I show you something, this phenomenon of harmonic resonance. In every electrical circuit, you have to account for something. Eric Dollard mentioned something very interesting, because when they kicked Tesla out in 1903, JP Morgan and all these other guys, they set up their own electric companies, stole patents of Tesla. And, they would say to these electrical guys that have expertise in electron flow theory, can you replicate these power grid? And they said, sure, yeah, we know everything about electron flow. And their stuff kept blowing up. And it was JP Morgan set up General Electric and brought in Charles Steinmetz and his team to figure out what was going on. So they invented our oscillator, the oscilloscopes. They invented the voltmeters, watt meters, and all that. And they measure the magnetic fields. They do not measure electrons. They knew they were not dealing with electron flow. They knew they were dealing with the magnetic field spiraling around these wires and generated from those iron magnets. And they invented plasma detectors, which is something that I think people who want to try to figure out how to make plasma detectors could learn a lot from Steinmetz and his team. How do they do it? They're tuned to iron magnets. If we can get those tuned to CO2, you should be able to, I don't know how to do that, but I'm just saying. Anyway, the point is the power grids kept blowing up. And it was Steinmetz that figured out that there's this feedback loop that happens, that when you have a feedback loop, you get another layer of increased volume. It's interpreted as increased amplitude. So the generators were putting out a certain amount of volts, watts, and amps, and getting back a massive increase of amplitude that, according to what Eric Dollar was saying, is there's PhDs in electron flow. We're saying that's impossible. That would be over unity. But JP Morgan said, does it work? Yeah, okay. So all this, for the past 100 years, the electrical engineers have been using Steinmetz equations to calculate the over unity in the power grid. It's not really over unity, it's feedback loop. And it's real, and it has to be accounted for. Tesla accounted for it, and he used that. he used the increase in amplitude, where the other guys were not thinking about it as an energy, a plasma reactor. They were looking at it as electron flow. And so you have to account for that increase in amplitude, okay? But look at what I was just saying about the energy fields radiating out from this central core. This is a hole in the universe. It has a certain diameter. Its diameter is directly related to the outermost layer. So the outermost layer's diameter is dependent on the environment. So the diameter of the central core is related to the diameter of the outer layer relative to the environment. So if the environment allows it to go out so far, it'll have a certain diameter, so will the diameter of the central core. If it's a smaller, more pressure, the diameter gets smaller, the diameter of the central core will be smaller. So once this enters an environment of the Earth, the diameter of the central core becomes fixed within that environment. So you have a hole in the universe that's got a fixed diameter, and you have 12 fields radiating out in every direction. These fields, they're no different than the arteries and the veins of your body. They take up space, right? And they come around and go back in. So you have 12 fields going out and those same 12 fields going back in. So in your central core, if we do it like this, you have a river of energy here and then there, and they have to make space for each other, and they have to allow to accommodate each other. So you're going to get these rivers of energy radiating out and taking up space within its fixed diameter. So when these fields go in and they come back out of the second generation of fields has to go through a smaller diameter. Now, this is my theory about this. This could be wrong, but it seems to me that they take up space. And if this is a fixed diameter, it's like having a garden hose where when you tighten the diameter of the nozzle, the fields shoot out at a faster speed. And so they go out faster. I think that's the simple mechanical reason for this feedback loop, because the next generation has a higher velocity. And so each of these layers has its own arteries and veins. The next one's got its own arteries and veins. The next one's got its own arteries and veins, right? And each layer is doing that. Each layer has a slightly lower mass, slightly slower heartbeat rate, but a slightly faster velocity in the field's flow, because the diameter keeps closing and closing and closing and closing. I think that's really the simple truth of this mystery of harmonic resonance and why that feedback loop causes an increase in volume. So you have a decreasing in heartbeat rates and an increase in the field flow rate. So we have the gradient flow, and we have the gradient flow of the spectrum of frequencies, beats, a spectrum of masses, and a spectrum of field flows. This is what we've been using for our, to measure gradients, how much faster one flow is relative to the next one. Okay, does that make sense? Anybody have anything to say about that?
Yeah, some pretty intense conceptual ideas there. Any input from folks? Any questions or other comments? Jedi has a bunch of comments in the chat here. I can read it. I don't know if it'll make sense if I read it. It says 12 notes in one octave. That makes sense. 7 octaves. We are following harmonics. You add +1 to a note, it will be out of tune. So non-harmonic is +2, +3, +4, even worse. But +6 could fall into the next harmonic node. Considering all the possible values in a 128-step system, value of A notes would be 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64.
Okay. No, you're misunderstanding. Here's the way it works.
Of those octaves.
Yeah, no. You're misunderstanding. From the outer layer, this one has a heartbeat rate of 1. The second one has a heartbeat rate of 2 to 1, which means the second layer is an octave above. Next rate has a 3 to 1. It's 3 times the heartbeat rate, not 1 beat, 2 beats, 3 beats, but it amounts to that. In other words, if for every 1 time I have a heartbeat rate here, I have 2 here, and I have 3 here. That's an octave. This would be the interval we call a fifth. Then a 4 would be another octave, and the next one would be 5, which would be the third. We call it. If I give letter names to these, this would be an A, E, A, C, and so on. That would be the harmonic overtones. It's times that. And same thing here. This was 127 to it's a ratio. 2 to 1, 3 to 1, 4 to 1, 5 to 1, 5 to 4, 128 to 127. Right? So that's the way that works. Right? And it's the same thing with the mass. The mass decreases. The mass of this second to the last layer, or if we count it from the outside in, the first layer, it has a mass of 1/128th of the totality. This one has a mass of 2 1/28ths, 3 1/28ths, 4 1/28ths, and so on, right? But then there's a field flow of the arteries and veins, which is the inverse. So this one has the fastest flow, 128 to 1. Second one has 127 to 1, and so on, in the exact inverse. So you have these heartbeat rates and the difference of the flow in the inverse. So you have yin yang and feng shui, and you have a variety of them, right? And that's just in one. That's just in one plasma field, in one bandwidth. Okay, so if you look, Mr. Keshe said something like, he draws a circle. So this is hydrogen. And I'll give it its atomic number 1. And then you have another circle, he calls it oxygen, and I'll give it its atomic number 8. Now, when he's doing that, he's just drawing the outer layer Coulomb barrier. These are plasmas. And if you think of this, if you look at it, if in your mind, you think of an atom and you think of that Atomic Energy Commission's logo, so to speak, with the protons and neutrons and the electrons flying around it and the electron shell and the bouncing and the quantum leap and all the rest of it, that's a mirage. That's a false interpretation. If you think of it as, even if it's not 128 layers, however many layers there are, you have this, a ball inside a ball inside a ball. We're replicating the universe with our multiple core reactors. That's what it is. And Mr. Keshe is very clear on that in the flower drawing and in the presentation and many other places. It's a ball inside a ball inside a ball, an egg inside an egg inside an egg. So you have this. So if you now think about it, if a hydrogen atom has 128 layers, just say for example, that would bring it, by the way, to the perfect octave at the outer layer and 8 octaves down, right? So that brings that balance there, right? Where if it ends not on an octave, it's not home, so to speak. It hasn't resolved itself. So that's one of the reasons why I think it's 128 layers, right? There's a few other reasons as well, but okay. So if you look at a hydrogen, it's a plasma. So on the outer layer, it's got 1, 2 to 1, 3 to 1, 4 to 1, right on up to 128 to 1, right? And its flow rate is the reverse. So you have this beating, it's a cell, it's a living cell. Mr. Keshe made it a point in the health workshops with the various organs that to say, see the skin, so the heart has a skin, the liver has a skin, the lungs have a skin. Every organ has its skin, meaning it's a plasma inside a plasma inside a plasma. So in a simple way, you're looking at the organs, the internal organs of a plasma field. It's got its heart at the very center, and it's got its own liver, an equivalent of liver and lungs and all the rest of it. And they all have their individual arteries and veins connecting them with their own flow rates and all the rest of it. It's a living cell. So if hydrogen is a plasma and it's got this 128 layers, for example, and then the oxygen is also a plasma. So it's got its 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 and so on, right up to 128. If you measure, if you look at the numbers of the atomic numbers, then this 8 does not refer to numbers of protons, neutrons, and electrons. It's measuring its heartbeat rate relative to hydrogen. It's its energy. It's its energy field relative to hydrogen. So oxygen, if it's beating 8 times faster than hydrogen, then it's still a plasma. They're both plasmas. They have their internal organs. They have all the same thing. The only thing that differentiates an oxygen from a hydrogen is this number, which, well, if it's an energy package, it's not a measure of protons, neutrons, and electrons, it shouldn't be that hard of a leap to realize this is its heartbeat rate at the outer layer. Now, if that's true, then the first layer of oxygen, it's still 1, 2 to 1, 3 to 4, and 4 to 1, but relative to hydrogen, the first layer is 8 times faster. The second layer of hydrogen is 16 times faster. Then it's a 3 to 1 ratio, which is 24 times. And then 4 times is 32, and so on, right up until you get to 128 times 8. So now, if you think about, we have somebody in the chat, maybe I should answer a question.
Which one is that?
Oh, I'm just reading here. Well,
does your octave change, or? Well,
an octave is a 2 to 1 ratio, or 4 to 1, or 8 to 1. So what's 1? If that's what I'm saying. Hydrogen is it's in its own key, but oxygen it's in its own key, which is 8 times faster than hydrogen. It's actually 3rd octave higher, right? So it's an interesting thing that oxygen and hydrogen are perfect octaves of each other. Carbon isn't, nitrogen isn't. They're different notes. But it's interesting that hydrogen and oxygen would have that relationship. I'll come back to that in a minute if I can, but look, we have our triple core reactors, right? So if I just call these chambers, here's the first chamber, second chamber, third chamber from the outside in. And you have another one here. Okay, so you have your first chamber, second chamber, third chamber on each of these. Now, if you use 3 different GaNs materials, I'm just going to say GaNs 1, 2, and 3. And it could be GaNs cocktails or whatever, as long as they're different. You have 3 different GaNs materials. When you load the reactor, if I put GaNs 1 in chamber 1, GaNs 2 in chamber 2, GaNs 3 in chamber 3, and then I reverse that, I put GaNs 3 in chamber 1 and the other one, GaNs 2 and 2 and 3 and 1 in 3, reverse that. It would be a mistake to say, because if these are both filled with the same amount of GaNs material, so that's another factor that we will measure one thing at a time, but the totality of the field strength of both of these is 6. This one's also 6, right? 1 plus 2 plus 3. So you could say, well, this is going to interact like this, but that would be not correct. That would be, right? We know that that's not how you do it. They link cats to cats, dogs to dogs. So I have GaNs 1 links to GaNs 1. So this one is linking to the third chamber of this one. first chamber to the third chamber, second chamber to the second chamber, and third chamber to the first chamber. Right? That's a specific energy signature that would be different if I was to, let's see. I lose my eraser. Okay. Now, if I loaded this 1, 2, 3 and 1, 2, 3, then you have a different energy signature. You have 1 linking to 1 and 2 linking to 2 and so on. If I loaded this one 1, 2, 3 and this one 3, 1, 2, I'll get a different energy signature. I could load this one 3, 2, 1 and or 3, 1, 2 and this one 1, 2, 3 or 1, 3, 2 or whatever. I can have 6 different possible energy signatures based on how I load these reactors. This is really important because you have basically the same field strength, but different energy signatures the way the chambers are interacting. Right? So if you look at this hydrogen to oxygen and you look at it like the first layer of the hydrogen will not link to the first layer, the first chamber of hydrogen. It links to the 8th layer. The second layer of the oxygen links to the 16th layer, the third layer to the 24th, the fourth to the 32nd, and so on. Every layer of the oxygen will find a layer to link to in the hydrogen, but not every layer of the hydrogen links to the oxygen. There's gaps. There's gaps in it. And when you have the interaction between the two, it'll give a specific energy signature that links the hydrogen to the oxygen. All right? If that makes sense. So that it's the first layer of the hydrogen, and then the 8th layer, and then the 16th layer, and then the 24th layer, and so on. So when they link, you're going to get the interaction between the two with a specific energy signature happening here that's based on, it's like this is an atom, this is an atom, this is the molecule that's formed that unites them like a flock of birds. Literally, it's one communication hub, the soul of this, all of these GANS materials, linking them together as a single entity, behaving as a single entity. And its layers are directly dependent on the positioning of the layers, the way they link. So you have one molecule with the same GANS material, just 1, 2, 3. You have 6 different possible molecular structures, so to speak, based on the difference of these two reactors, right? Same thing with the oxygen and the hydrogen. And then there's the other thing, which is the difference of the heartbeat rates of the hydrogen and oxygen is equal to the heartbeat rate of a third entity that's produced. Now, this thing, if you look at it in a simple way, you say 1 from 8 is 7, 7 from 8 is 1. So the difference is 1. But in reality, you have to subtract everything from everything and reduce it down. So even in a simple subtraction, 8 from 1, or 1 from 8, you have to take 1 from 8 is 7, and then 1 from 7 is 6, and 5, and then 4, and then 3, and then 2, and then 1. And then you have to subtract 1 from every one of those, and you have to subtract every one of those from every one of those. And if you do all that process, you'll find that you end up with 1 at the difference between the hydrogen and the oxygen. So that means when you have a hydrogen, you have 1 hydrogen, 1 oxygen, and then you have the baby, which is a second hydrogen, which has got its own specific energy sequence, energy field. There'll be 1 layer here, and then the hydrogen's got all these other layers in between, but then you have only where they're interacting. So you have the hydrogen in the outer layer, and then you have the 16th layer, the 24th layer, the 32nd layer, and so on, right until you get, so the the energy signature that you're getting for a water molecule is different than any other molecule. It's its own unique energy signature because it's the only one that will link to hydrogen in the same way or relative to hydrogen. That makes sense? This is what you carry in your spaceship. You don't carry barrels of water. You carry the energy signature. You store this energy signature in the fields. Exactly the same as you store a memory in your mind, so to speak. I know that's a little esoteric, but anybody have any comments?
Yeah, it's getting pretty far out there, all right. Jedi mentions if we were talking about distance, strength of a field considered within the interaction of a couple of notes. I think you were talking about many of the same words at the time he was typing that, actually. And he mentions the ratios are in fact tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone.
Ah, well, now you're talking about the modes. See, now that's something else. That's how you plot your position relative to the universe. But look, you leave it more simple. Everything has these ratios of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to 128. But when I made this water molecule, it doesn't have those ratios. It has 1, 8, 16, 24, 32, and so on. It's not 1, 2, 3, 4 because there's an interaction. It's the difference between them. The hydrogen might have that, the oxygen might have that, but the water molecule does not. Water molecule doesn't, it's skipping some of the tones. You know, Caroline said something really interesting in one of the private teachings about the music, that the soul of the man, I'm not going to tell the whole story, but the soul of man is a song. It's a melody, right? Now, if you look at what I just showed here, if hydrogen and oxygen come together, you get two hydrogens or a hydrogen and oxygen, and the molecule itself is the field strength of a hydrogen. So the particle physics says there's two hydrogen atoms, but that's not really correct. It's a multiple chamber reactor, but it's got its own melody. If I assign letter names to these notes, then I would say that here's the melody of a hydrogen atom, or I'm sorry, of a water molecule. You have the outer layer is an A. The next layer in is 8, which is an A, three octaves above it. And then the next layer is an E, and the next layer is another A. You always have more of the roots. That's why you always have more of the fundamental, which is one of the reasons it's the fundamental, it's the container. Anyway, you have an A, and I forget the ratios of these, but let's see, I think 32 would be the A, and then you'd have another E, I think, and then you have a C, and then you have another A, and then you have a whole melody of notes. So if I went to a piano and I started playing these notes, I'm not just going A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. I'm having a specific melody. It's a specific melody. It's skipping some of the notes and not all of the notes. See? So does the soul.
How would something like pollution in the water affect that? It would skip some of the notes that should be there normally in a healthy water, for example, add more notes, or how would that?
I've been
interaction of layers, like you were saying. And if you consider the modern idea of water being structured in clusters, and large clusters are hard for the cell to hydrate with, and small clusters or small, small molecules of the water clusters are much easier for the cell to process and so on. So how would that reflect in this theory?
Yeah, in the scenario, yeah. Well, I think of the different, what would you call them, clusters, as flocks. I mean, you have a big flock of birds, you have some smaller flocks of birds, and the way they interact with the environment is going to be relative to the environment and how many they are. So that's one aspect of it. It's how many of them have flocked together in a single particle. It's not a particle, it's a plasma as a single entity. So, and each one of those flocks, like this water molecule, when you interact it with another water molecule, then it's got its own thing. And however many of those, each flock has its own energy signature as well. Its own, no two flocks will have the exact same energy signature. So you have that. And as far as pollutants go, I've been really, the only elements I'm confident that I plotted correctly with the letter names are the lower ones that Mr. Keshe I'm sure Mr. Keshe has confirmed, because all of the other ones are so unreliable. I mean, I plotted copper at 64.5, and I heard Armin call it 62. Now I'm going with Armin, but again, maybe he misspoke. Maybe he said, "Oh, did I say 62? I meant something else," but probably not. So again, I know how to correlate the elements based on these ratios to give them letter names so you can find the melody to it. You can see whenever you have an octave, instead of counting the difference of the frequencies the way I did there, and that's a nightmare. In fact, you'll never get it right. Isaac Newton did this with a calculus and equation he invented with a certain algorithm. If you don't use that, you'll never get it right. But if you use it just as an octave, hydrogen and oxygen are octaves. Whenever you have an octave, the lower note's the root note. So I don't need to do any calculus or any subtracting of all of these. And if I forget one, I screwed up the answer. I know an octave, the lower note's the root. So I have an oxygen and hydrogen. I instantly know I'm going to have another hydrogen because that's the way the intervals do, right? If I have a carbon and an oxygen, the oxygen will be the root note. If I have a carbon and a hydrogen, the hydrogen will be the root note. And so I can look at the amino acid and not do any calculations at all and know what the root note is. So when I have the carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen, that's an E, G, and an A. And I know that that's a second inversion A chord, which means I have an A 2 octaves below hydrogen. It's something that I can do off the top of my head. It takes 20 minutes to understand and figure out, and a little bit of practice in doing it. And you can calculate any interactions. But in order to put the right letter note, I need to know the right number. And if I plot carbon or copper at 64.5 and it should be 62, I'll give it the wrong letter name, get the whole wrong behaviors. So I'm really reluctant to give any specific things about, what happens when you get chlorine or when you get this other thing in there. But I will say this, it's going to affect the energy signature. It's going to affect the energy signature. So you need a certain energy signature of water in your body. If you have the water, but it's been altered or it's been affected in some way as an energy signature, as a totality, as the one communication hub of that soul of that molecule, and it's got something that's not good for the humans, then you're going to have a problem, right? See, so it's just basically what's the energy signature of it? And then how is that affecting it? How are the layers being formed? And each layer, once it's formed, each layer is in effect the field strength of a particular atom, what we call an atom. So you could be getting secondary effects where you're creating a field strength of an atom, which is occurrence of one of the layers that's unintended, so to speak, right? And that's causing a problem. I think that's what's happening with viruses and so on. It's just an energy signature that's slightly out of tune, or that's changing the tuning, or like an emotional problem in the soul of the man causes a shifting of the position of this field that just changes the Coulomb barrier position here, a little bit off. Maybe not to even affect it until it gets 100, 15 layers out. And all of a sudden now, that's supposed to be carbon. It's now lead or calcium or something like that. And see what I mean? That's how that works. That's the filtering process. That's how we're doing that. We're filtering these. And if, all you need is 128 layers. I mean, really, you can do a huge amount just by changing a few layers on the inside and not even changing the others. How drastically the Coulomb barrier gets changed when you go out 6 layers, 8 layers, 15 layers. And if you're adjusting even one Judas, just one layer in each, or one of these rivers, one of the apostles, just slightly, you can make huge differences in the structure. Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Did that answer? Did that answer any questions there? Or?
Or did it start some new ones? It's quite interesting, Mario.
Well, thank you for indulging me in that.
Yeah, that was an interesting, especially interesting part that you brought up about being able to almost instantly perceive the root, root note. And,
that's the purpose of the 7 musical tones. There's not 7 musical tones. That was the first thing when Nicholas brought that up. I went, that's ridiculous. That's a myth. 7 musical tones. There's not, of course, 7 musical tones, but there's 7 intervals. Because even though you can divide the octave up in a million ways, we still only use the 7 letters of the Greek alphabet to designate the octave. That's the thing. When I realized that, I went, oh, it's not about the actual notes themselves. It's about being able to measure the intervals off the top of your head. And they're color coded. The Thai calendar, Mr. Keshe, the last 3 years in a row is called the Thai New Year, a day that was prophesied for thousands of years. I think the Thai calendar is the oldest living calendar in existence. If it's not the oldest, it's one of. It's over 2,500 years old. April 14th is New Year's. And in Thailand, every day of the week has a color. Interesting, right? They correlated the 7 colors of the rainbow to the 7 musical tones, to the 7 days of the week, to the positioning of the sun, moon, stars, and planets. That's where we get our calendar from. They're the same thing. Mystic, so you can use color coding for this.
What about what Jedi says that there are 12 intervals in a scale?
No, not 12. Not 12.
Steps?
No, yeah, there's not 12 intervals.
5 black notes, you mentioned?
Yeah, but that would be, say, an A to a C sharp or an A flat to a C. Okay, those would be different intervals. However, their behavior is the same. In other words, you just count letters. If it's 3 letters, the lower note's the root. So if it's an A to a C, A is the root. If it's an A to a C sharp, A is the root. If it's an A flat to a C, A flat's the root. And that will be an octave below or the unison of the A flat, but it works like that. See, so even with the sharps and flats, you still only have 7 letters. So you only have 7 behaviors, the 7 valleys, the 7 churches of God. Jesus says, your behavior is such and such, and therefore the result is going to be such and such, in a way. And the 7 valleys, the valley of peace and the valley of love and the valley of patience and behaviors, 7 behaviors that repeat over and over and over again. And if you can correlate the numbers of these atomic numbers to these harmonics and assign letter names to the elements, then do it off the top of your head. And they're color coded. Mr. Keshe uses colors in a way that's going to be probably more reliable, except humans' eyes are not reliable in that. Mr. Keshe is different. So you know, and I think Mr. Keshe said that soon our eyes will be able to, like Mr. Keshe said a few weeks ago, like if two people see a red, one will see red 1 and the other person will see red 4. Or some people will see an orange instead of, you know, to me it's red, somebody else it looks to what they call orange. So it's unreliable at our level at this point, I think, the colors. But I think Mr. Keshe said soon that's going to change. You know, we'll see the actual colors and everybody will agree on them. But I think the musical tones is man's way of being able to deal with this for the past thousands of years. There's another reason why we use musical tones. If you look at the behavior of water, water behaves like a plasma. However, it's subject to inertia. So like the fields will tend to go out and they curve around and come back on each other. But you will not see the Mississippi River going back over your head and coming over. You know, it's subject to inertia. So you can learn a lot about the behavior of plasma by looking at water, but you have to distinguish between where the inertia is affecting it. And unless you have some sort of a blueprint to work with first, then how do you know what's inertia and what's not? And the same thing with not the same thing with light, but with light, the behavior is in the superconductive, supercapacitive environment. So the behavior of light is the behavior of plasma as it would be anywhere in the universe, not subject to inertia. But in order to get white light to start with, how did the ancients even get white light except during the day, right? You cannot study it at night. And then how do you divide it? You have to get a prism and some sort of a crystal, and it's a lot more difficult to work with. And the frequency is so fast that it's just more difficult. Where if you stretch a string and you pluck the string, yes, the string is subject to inertia, but the energy package is not. And you can just divide the string or take a hollow tube and blow into the tube. You get the energy package that's not subject to inertia. And you divide the tube in half, you get the octave. So you can divide the layers of a musical tone, of a plasma, using musical tones within a range that's easier for humans to understand. That's why it's the flower of life and the 7 musical tones, not the flower of life and the behavior of water or the 7 colors of the rainbow, which it is. But see, I think that's what's going on. But correlating these elements, but see, here's something else that's happened to me. And it also has a lot to do with explaining Mr. Keshe about this. As soon as I tried to show what I just showed here for a couple of years now. And every time when I first showed this, and I mentioned, well, I calculated a table of the frequencies of the harmonics and correlated them to the elements so that I can assign letter names. And what I got was, did you use 432? And I would say, what, 432 what? That doesn't have any meaning to me. 432 what? And you know what? I spent 2 hours explaining why 432 has no meaning to this. It's totally irrelevant. It's not, there's no 432. Somebody put in the comments on there that 432 is the frequency of God. You know, and I think, wow, okay. You know, if you look at a hydrogen atom, well, what's the frequency of a hydrogen atom? There's no frequency. It's like saying, what's the frequency of Beethoven's 5th Symphony? There's a whole bunch of frequencies in Beethoven's 5th Symphony. Which one are you talking about? You mean the fundamental? But that's only one of the layers. You can't look at it as a frequency. There's a field strength. That's the right word for it. It's got a multitude of layers. Each one has its own ratio of heartbeat rates. That has these arteries and veins that are connecting each layer with membrane structures, with internal organs, each beating in a cascading effect, and so to speak. And you have them getting faster as they go in and the flow rates going slower as they go in or faster as they go out. And you have this whole complex structure. So what's the frequency of God mean? That's such a... Well, it clearly does not represent the structure of a plasma. You can't have a frequency of God or a frequency of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony or a frequency of a hydrogen atom. It's a field of frequencies. And do you mean the frequency of the heart, of the pulsing of the arteries and veins, which is the exact inverse of the heartbeat rates of the Coulomb barriers? See what I mean? You have 128 to 1 and 1 to 128 in heartbeat rate and 128 to 1 in flow rate, the exact inverse. So what's the frequency there?
See what I mean? The same problem with trying to name the elements with a number. And you can't do that because of the isotopes involved. And the isotopes sometimes can be more important in the actual interactions.
That's right. That's
predominant sort of matter level part of it. So,
yeah.
And in the area of transmutation, that's where the isotopes really come into play. You know, if you look at copper, for example, I think we looked at it last week, and there's like 30 or 40 isotopes of copper from a wide number range. And it overlaps with zinc, for example, and copper and zinc can, you know, it's easy to see how they can transmute very easily between each other. So
yeah. And you know, there's another thing that, you know, like I was saying, how you have the hydrogen and the oxygen and they come together, and there's a specific positioning of the layers, which is not just 2 to 1, 3 to 1. It's 8 to 1, 16 to 1, you know, 32 to 1, and so on. It skips a whole bunch of them. It's not just a basic harmonic overtone series. It's a specific sequence of them, right? But now if you think about this, and let's see it muddy up the water even more, where the fields of nitrogen happen is where the sun's field interacts with the Earth's field. So that means nitrogen has got its own energy signature that, even though it correlates to the harmonic overtone series, it's not just 2 to 1, 3 to 1, 4 to 1, 5 to 1. It's got its own energy signature that's unique to it. Does that make sense? So even none of the elements are basic raw plasmas. That's what I'm saying. This is a standard default, but nothing is standard default, even in a nitrogen atom. And then if you look at the nitrogen atom, when that opens up, that's a neutron. When that opens up, it crosses the field of the Earth here, crosses the field of the Earth there. And here's where you get what we call carbon. And here's what we call oxygen. So each of these is the difference between the field of this and the Earth's field at that position and the Earth's field at this position. They have their own energy signatures. So none of these elements, when I said oxygen has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, that's not really correct either. It's got its own energy signature based on the interaction of the nitrogen and the Earth interacting at that position. So it's got its own layering. And each of these has their own layering. So there's no standard default here. We need to understand the standard default, but we realize that, well, oxygen is the difference between the nitrogen and the Earth, and carbon's the difference between the nitrogen and the Earth. And so that means they have their own energy signatures. It's got its own melody. But if we can correlate them to the letters of the alphabet, of the musical tones, and correlate them to the colors of the rainbow, then you don't have to worry about any of the other stuff, because that's their magnetico-gravitational energy signature relative to each other. It will accommodate. It's a pretty amazing thing how that works, but it does. In other words, we call that timbre. Timbre, if it's a spectral analysis, hydrogen will have 60 and then hertz or whatever, but then you don't have 120 and so you have 8 times that and then 16 times that. So you have a specific energy signature that would show up on a spectral analysis for hydrogen. And each of these has their own, and each molecule has their own. So I lost track of something I was, well, each of these has their own energy signature. So when they interact, so this is a melody. This is an A, and then the other A, and so on. Each of these has their own melody, but this would be the timbre. If it's hydrogen, that's an A. If it's oxygen, relative to hydrogen, because it's 8, that's doubled, hydrogen doubled. So that would be 2 to 1, 4 to 1, 8 to 1. So that's a third octave higher. So that would be a letter named A. That would be oxygen. So I could look at the spectral analysis of hydrogen, and it'll have its own spectral analysis. If I call this oxygen, it's still its own A with its own energy signature. It's only an E or an A, an octave higher relative to hydrogen. Again, you have that, it only has an existence relative to something else. So it's an octave, but it'll have its own spectral analysis. Does that make sense? So each of these elements, but that's what we would call timbre. But if, like on a piano, if I play a note A, that's the piano's got its own energy signature based on the metals and the woods and everything that's there that's interacting with that tone. The tone will have its own frequency fundamental, and it'll have a certain timbre. If I play the same note on a trumpet, it's the same frequency, but it'll have a different energy signature because it's made of brass and all the other things. It's the interaction of all the stuff in a trumpet as opposed to all the stuff in a piano. But an A is an A. So all I really need to do is to get the basic letter names of them, and then the timbre takes care of itself, so to speak, at least for some of the behaviors. And so I think that the key is the 7 musical tones, getting away from these atomic numbers. Mr. Keshe said, well, we don't say the periodic table's wrong, but then he goes on to totally destroy it and say it's totally wrong. But there's some things about it that are correct. But the basic premise of it, that it's protons, neutrons, and electrons, and that image we get, you know, based on the logo of the Atomic Energy Commission that we've all grown up with, that's a mirage. And so we really need to shift our imaging in our minds, our understanding of it, our interpretation of it as being this energy-based, energy signatures. So, okay, I think I've taken up enough time here. Unless somebody else has some comments or questions or something, I'll mute my mic.
Well, thank you, Mario. Very enthusiastic presentation here and some great ideas you're bringing out. It's hard for everyone to, not everyone, for some of us, I guess, to get a grip on exactly what you mean when you are saying these things. But it's becoming more and more clear as we go along, I think, because as we mentioned in the last workshop, sometimes you have to hear a new idea multiple times in order for it to even start to sink in. So they say you have to hear a new idea 3 times, is one example, in order to even begin to accept it as a new idea. Otherwise, it goes over the top of one's head, as we say. But no, there's some very insightful things here, and it'd be good. There was a comment in the live stream about from Tony, who says, Mario knows so much about sound and music, which is quantum. He works so hard to relate this and energy to us. Perhaps some visual experiments done with harmonics and reactors or other matter, like you can see harmonics and frequencies shaping water coming out of a hose. He gives that example. So he's saying basically some experiment with sound and frequencies and some sort of array that might show us these interactions that you're speaking of, that are the basic, you know, the principles of the creation of the universe and the way that the universe works. So we should be able to show some practical examples of how that works.
Well,
just,
you know,
soap bubbles, for example, maybe that would show the interaction of these Coulomb barrier fields, or something simple like that. Keep it simple,
yeah,
but
there's
clear.
a bazillion. There's a bazillion of these online. You can't show them here. I'm doing what I always have to do to make a living. I'm traveling. I'm in a hotel room in northern Thailand. I don't have access to hardly. I can't even make a reactor. I can't even make any gas materials. I have to travel really light because the restrictions of the airlines are getting more and more and more on luggage and all the rest of it. So it's really hard. And I mean, the synchronized metronomes. You go and watch synchronized metronomes. You can see the pulling of the fields together like a flock of birds. You can actually see it happening. You can actually see the pendulums pushing each other into alignment. You can, yeah, I mean, there's in history, I mean, the story about the monks or whoever using drums and horns and lifting boulders up hundreds of feet in the air. Or you can see people using sound to suspend little pebbles and things in the air, just in a small way. You can find this everywhere. There's never been a time in history that men did not understand this to some extent or another, and it's always been there. It's been there from the beginning. And you can go online. Yeah, you see a guy puts a plate on a speaker, pours some salt on it, and starts to change the frequencies, and you see the salt lining up in layers. You'll see it. And if you use sand, you'll see a different set of proportions. And if you use water, you'll see a different set of proportions based on the frequencies. Because again, though, you're not looking at the water's behavior. You're not looking at the sound behavior. You're looking at the interaction between the two. Right? So that's another thing we have to get used to, is you're not really seeing anything. You're actually seeing the difference between you and what you're looking at. That's a strange concept to get used to. And there's another thing is, the second you look at something, you're creating a feedback loop, which means that you're increasing the amplitude between you and it. So in a way, you're manifesting it by looking at it, right? It's not that it doesn't exist when you're not looking at it, but it doesn't exist as what you're looking at until you look at it. That's a strange one to get used to. Yeah?
Not actually part of our reality until we start to engage with it with one of our senses, and usually the sight is number one thing.
Yeah, that's the one that's directly connected to the soul. Mr. Keshe said in that
actually, I think that is true, but also, if you think about it, when you enter into a new space, say you're coming into a new Coulomb barrier of opening the door of a room, just some room. And what is the sense? We have these senses, our vision, our hearing, and so on. Which sense is the most immediate, and which organ sticks out the most? Well, in most people at least, and that would be the nose. And our sense of smell. The sense of smell is actually the most direct of all the senses. It has the most direct link in the nervous system, most immediate. So the first thing we come into a new space, that the Coulomb barrier hits our nose, and whether we notice it or not, that's a different issue altogether. But it is the one that we know what the space is by its smell, basically. And that's kind of an interesting idea there. If you're going to, if we talk about the Coulomb barrier being like a big soap bubble, well, the first thing you're going to bump into, unless you got a big belly or big breasts or something, I suppose, but your nose is what leads us, actually, unless you have your hands stuck out in front of you, perhaps, or something like that. But generally, it's the sense of smell is actually the most immediate to the brain function, as we call it, and all that. It's interesting concept.
Yeah, and it shows something, that these are our navigational tools. That's how we navigate the universe. So, yeah, yeah, that's so right. I remember Mr. Keshe talking about the nose, how that's the one you use to tell what's behind you, because you only have eyes looking in front of you, but your smell tells you, okay, it's something coming from over there, back that way, or this way, or whatever. So again, those are navigational tools. And smell, yeah, all of our senses. That's what they are. They're giving us a perception of the universe. Us taking it as particles and thinking of them as particles is a mirage. That's what makes it a mirage. If you realize that what you're dealing with are these energy fields in these layers, then a mirage is a wrong interpretation of a real phenomenon. So you can't change the phenomenon, you have to change your interpretation of it. So the more we get to realize these are our senses giving us navigational tools. The way, Captain Kirk says on screen, Scotty, or whatever, that's what we're doing. We're seeing, but we have smell, taste, feels, touch, and whatever I missed, taste, right? Those are our tools for navigating our environment. Yeah. So if we think of it as energy, then we're closer to not seeing a mirage anymore, not misinterpreting it. That this is a smell and again, even the smell is the difference between you and it. It's not even its smell, it's the difference of its smell and your. And that tells us, okay, to one entity, that smells good. To us, it smells dangerous. That could kill me. But to another entity, that's what it lives on or something, yeah? So it smells good to one entity, smells dangerous or, deadly to us, right? Again, based on the difference of us and it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, any questions for Mario here, or any other ideas to bring into it? It's funny, you were just mentioning, Mario, about salt and water and sand, and Tony I was just staring at Tony's question at that time in the live stream. Can salt molecules be magnetized by identifying its spectrum energy signature, so an array of magnets pull only the salt out of water without electricity? So put salt and sand on a black base. Anyway, it was a kind of a comment question there. It had most of the words all the words you were talking about in one phrase, it seems. Anyway, okay. Anybody else would like to weigh in or have another topic they would like to move to at this point? Thanks, Mario. Is there anything else you'd like to add at the ending here, or is it complete for now?
I think that's about as far as I could take it now. I do have to say something. A couple of weeks ago, I mentioned that I thought it was 5 years ago that I discovered Mr. Keshe, but it was only 4 years ago. And when I was directing people to Nicholas's presentation, I was saying April of 2014, but it was actually April of 2015. And it was Pavel who asked me for it. And I went back and I looked and I watched the presentation again. I was, oh, right. So I got that wrong, which again shows for me that, well, of course, I mean, I didn't actually calculate it and go back and look into it and double check. My sort of came off the top of my head. But, that I need to be checked on this. People who do have the time and ability to go back and look at some of those teachings and check my work or check this. I know that I've tried to confirm all of the stuff that I mentioned here. I've tried my best to confirm it directly from Mr. Keshe's teachings. I mean, even the 128 layers, I could explain a few more reasons why I think it's 128 layers per bandwidth, so to speak, at least for us. But, maybe that's wrong, maybe that's right. It's not as important in and of itself, but it shows that I need to be checked on this. need to be proofed. I cannot proof my own work, you know? And, you know, it seems like, wow, 4 years ago, only 4 years ago. To me, it seems like 40 years, to be honest with you. I mean,
Yeah.
I think you can relate to that, Rick, right?
Many lifetimes ago, yes. It's
Yeah.
quite a body of work that has been unveiled in the last few years. Yes, it's
Yeah. And
incredible.
there's something else. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Rick.
I was just going to mention, it seems to always come back to basics, and similar to what you've gone through here and what the last couple of hours basically is basics, but yet it keeps extrapolating through the interactions, and all of a sudden you can talk for 2 hours about something, you know, this basic core principle of the universe according to your perception and so on. So it's amazing how you know, what are the biggest numbers we've used here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to 128. No fractions and no decimals, basically, and so on. It's very simple, and yet it's so deep and complex at the same time, or sophisticated, you might say. And yet it's also very clear and simple. So it's a tricky world that we've entered into with this whole plasma teaching, and it's quite exciting, and it never ceases to amaze me how intricate it can be for something that's so simple at the same time.
Yeah, you know, the flower of life. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean the flower of life is the oldest fractal geometric pattern known to humans. It's just a circle, and yet look at how complex it can get, right? I mean, it's
all
just
the different flowers of the planet, as an example, and each one different, and even within the same variety, each one is different in its own way, and just beautiful arrays, but they're all based on the same flower of life reconfiguration, basically. Same basic fractal, only done as with, like you say, a slight alteration here or there in the DNA structure.
Yeah, and if you think about the color of your eyes, that's a frequency, isn't it? Really, I mean, it's a position. So by filtering, if we really understand this concept, wherever I need to be proved and corrected and so on, the basic structure of this is from Mr. Keshe's teaching. It is Mr. Keshe's teaching. As little of my ideas as possible, except where I said, I think, you know, my idea. The basic concept is directly from Mr. Keshe's teaching. Yet it's so, it's a fractal geometric pattern, but the filtering, how, you know, if we realize that our emotions are controlling the position of each layer and how drastically that can have an effect on the entire structure, and that when we learn this and we start to accept this, and then we learn that we're filtering this every second of every day. You know, Mr. Keshe actually said the soul is the composer of the human body and conducting the orchestra every second. You know, literally controlling the positioning of these layers. That's the filtering. And we're doing that. So if you want green eyes, all you have to do is understand this and have your emotions change the color of your eyes. That's why I think Mr. Keshe said, when we can control the color of our eyes, we've matured to the point to where, but it's nothing more than the filtering of these layers. Very simple thing that can get so complex. Yeah. And
can I add one thing, Mario?
Yeah, please.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Rick. Don't forget the environment.
You, Jalal. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
What you said, Rick?
I said, who are you? Oh, Jalal. No, okay. Go ahead, Jalal.
Okay, my dear. Just one thing, don't forget the environment. We are here on Earth. We have a fixed position. So in fixed position, you need to change the environment. Even you have the filters, but you need to consider the fixed position you are in. And your body also is fixed condition due to the environment. If you can change the environment, you can change everything. And you are right. The soul have the highest strength. It can change everything. But that's need understanding. That's all. Thank you, Mario.
Okay, thank you, Jalal, for your words of wisdom. Oh, I see I've got some panelists, or some attendees here, rather. Paul, I see your hand is up, and I guess you want to say something. Go ahead, and I'll promote the others as well.
Yeah, good morning or good evening. I don't know what time area you're in. I just want to say thank you to Mario, because he so many times, when we spoke about different things, he so many times emphasized the importance of flower of life. But I have to admit that at that time I didn't understood that. And there was something somewhere ringing, but it wasn't that. But when I joined Rikyo, one of the meetings, I think 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, when Mario again was pointing out this this knowledge seekers workshops, I was wondering why that touched me so much. And then very quickly I went, for more details to Mario, where is it, and so on, just to, go and see that workshop. And I'm so grateful for pointing that out and emphasizing by Mario so many times, and others as well, because for me, that's one of the most important teachings. Maybe at the very beginning, that doesn't have a lot of meaning, because we have to somehow dilute these teachings to our own comprehension and approach to it from our own way of seeing it. But then when we start realizing what is really told on these teachings, then it's just to play with plasma. And there is many variations of comprehension of this, but I think I'm trying to emphasize the teachings as well. I think everyone who would like to understand more about plasma and behavior of these strangnesses and new creations in many different sections, materials, transportation, communication, whatever we want to pick, they should start from that teaching, and then they we should start go to some other teachings, trying to relate everything what has been told on other teachings to that certain one, which is 56th. So once more, I would like to say very thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Paul. Can you provide the link for that? Do you have the time link, clickable link that we could put in the chat, or somebody else perhaps?
On a mobile phone, so it would not really handy for me. But if anyone else would be capable to do it, I'm really emphasize that. Please go there and see it.
Yeah, give me a couple of minutes here. I'll find it and put it in the chat.
Okay, very good. And we also have, thank you, Paul. And we have a Jedi with his hand up here, like to say something, apparently.
Yeah, hello. So let's see. I think we have oversimplified a little things. We are still working with, let's say, 128 numbers, simple numbers. We have no fractions at all, because we just made the list of the atoms. And so we are using atom number 1, number 8, number 7, number 20. And so we are calculating by using an abstract concept, which is the name or the number of the atom. So we should look for the signature of the atom. That is something else. And that is a fraction of some kind of energy. And that is not as simple as the numbers we are using. So once we have this signature, then we are able to create the natural ratios and understand what's happening from the energetical point of view, not from our abstract point of view, which is an explanation.
So what do you mean by signature?
The signature, for example, let's consider the molar ionization. There are quite a number of values, and you can see in different octaves. If you take a look, you have the energy needed to free them. So that means that a specific kind of atom, let's say oxygen, it needs 1313.9 just to free itself from that level. Then you have another level, and so it will need 3388.3 to free himself from that second level. So that is the amount of energy needed to reach ionization. So if we are talking about energy, maybe that is a signature that is going to free that kind of atom, which is connected to nature because it is a value, energy field. It's moving. And where does it start to move? It starts exactly in that point, in that moment. So maybe that is the true number we are looking for. If we are talking about ratios, then we have to consider this kind of, let's say, electron volt measure, and so calculate it. It's on the Wikipedia. It's no problem. I mean, we can see it, but no one is calculating this kind of energies because it is very difficult to find out, calculate them. Okay. So if you are just considering harmonics in the piano keyboard, that's very simple, but it is Pythagoras. I mean, we're not there anymore. We're into plasma physics. So it's something we have to deal with, fractions. This is oversimplifying. It will help just to understand what we are, the concepts, the basics. Then we need to calculate and see what's happening. So once we get, let's say, CO2 guns moving, let's say in a rotor at 7,000 tours a minute, what's going to happen? You're gonna create a field that is oscillating, a vibration, starting with the vibration of the guns itself, and then it's going to move upwards. Now you have a value of CO2, which is created by two different nodes, so it's a chord, and that is moving, and it is oscillating, and it's creating the harmonics. But at the same time, the interactions of the two elements and the interactions with the environment is going to create many different fields. And because it is spinning, this is going to create a scalar wave. So we are not into pure harmonics. We are into scalar and harmonics at the same time. So there are various things that are happening at the same time. So we have a signature, we have acceleration, we have propagation of energy, we have interaction of the fields, and we mustn't start just saying, oh, this is letter A or note A, and then I have a double, then 3 times, or this ratios. That is nonsensical from my point of view, because we're talking about abstract concepts. It's just like astrology. If you are talking about astronomy, then you have to find out exactly when you had one day, or you take it off the month. And so you find out when you had 1 hour, or you take it away, and everything is wrong. So that's why we have 20 different methods to calculate astrologically. the picture we want to find out. So this is again the same kind of behavior we are following. We just got the numbers there, we got the elements, and we are calculating because they are called element number 1, element number 5, element number. We mustn't do this because this is abstract. We should stick to a magnetical kind of energy. Okay, let's calculate it. Electrically, what's happening? Okay, ionization, what's happening? From the optical point of view, what's happening? So you calculate all the different aspects, and then you find out if you are able to unite, let's say, these 4 lists all together and see that there is a behavior that is connecting these atoms together, their behavior and the energy flows, then you understand what's happening. But you need a natural value, not an abstract concept. Abstractions do not help science, because the work to give a good example, but it is an example. So I want to see it. So I tried to detect what's happening, and so I saw the scalar field. And there is not one picture of a scalar field generated by a GANs spinning around. So what's happening? I mean, no one found out that there is a propagation, it is a scalar field, and it's not possible. So I believe research is just holding back. And that is probably the explanation that we could give to why do GANs cure. That is probably the explanation, because they are affecting not the globality, of course, not the globality of the fields, but they are expanding. I could reach 24 different levels. So it is a flanging, like a flanger effect. And so you just add 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.5, etc. And the expansion of the central wave, so it's expanding upwards and downwards at the same time. Upwards and downwards. So it's like isotopes. They can just, you rise a little the energy or you lower it down. It's just like this. And then you can see it. Once you see it, there is a kind of harmonical aspect which is there. But all this is within a scalar range of frequencies that are working all together. And so, as Mario said, I cannot prove it. It takes one simple image, and the proof is there. I mean, it's not possible. Just practice it, because we are talking about a lot of numbers, and we need to just convert them. I said before, into a kind of image, a different image, and so we understand it. I want to listen to this kind of sound. And so, of course, I have to bring it down, because if we are talking about fractions and numbers that are so huge, I have to lower down the octaves. So by the order of magnitude of maybe dividing it 25 times, I will find exactly the sound that is going to create. And that's why I do not agree with the kind of Pythagoras and all that. That is very, to start with, it's quite nice, let's say. It's easy, but we have oversimplified. It takes a lot of years to become a nuclear engineer, I think. And so we just have to take time and to assimilate the concepts, and then just to find out how am I going to call this element according to magnetic fields? How am I going to call this element according to electrical field itself? That's all. Then, oh, it has a smell. Okay, this one is acid. This one is basic. This one is sour. Okay, it has a taste. you have to define it, but in a natural way. Then you can work with it. Probably alchemy in the past, they used to use very simple ways to find out. So we lost them, and now we need instruments. Now we can calculate, but we have to deal with these numbers, and they're not simple numbers. They are complex equations, fractals, algorithms. There are quite a few things that we have to just reconsider. I wrote in the chat. I wrote quite a few numbers, so you will find them there. And so we're not talking about isotopes. Here we are talking about energetic levels. And these are signature in some way or another. These are signatures. So we should try to. We know that if we reach that kind of level, it's going to free it. Okay, let's see the interaction. Ionization is going towards plasmatic in any case. Okay, so I hope the.
Okay, thank you for that transmission.
Okay, so just read the numbers. I mean, they are there. You just find the page in molar. It was molar ionization energies, and you find all the octaves, and you got all the values up to the 30th octave. So the elements are placed in a totally, completely different orders. So why is this happening? Why nobody takes care about this kind of, let's say, numbering? It's bizarre. It's bizarre. We're just calculating everything from another point of view. Okay, that is just an input. Let's find out what's happening next. Okay, we try it. I will send you the picture of the scalar field.
Okay,
so
thank you.
Think about it. Okay, bye.
Alrighty, thank you, Jedi.
Rick?
Yeah, hello, yes. Sorry, my mic was off there, I think.
Can I do something here in this picture?
Yes.
just you will be amazed.
Jalal, you're not going to mess up my perfect artwork here.
No. It's very beautiful, Mario.
Go ahead, actually. Go ahead. You could wipe it out.
No. I will not wipe it. I will do something only.
It's saved for eternity, Mario. No problem.
Look.
Screenshot.
Look.
Okay.
An eye, other eye, mouth, nose, head.
I get the mouth down below a bit there, but yeah, okay, I can see that.
Physicality. And what is that here?
Must be the heart.
No.
The voice?
Above the heart.
The voice box, perhaps.
Which part is fixing all the element in your body?
A thyroid?
Yes.
Was just a guess.
It is. I will take out the drawing and you see it again.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, I can definitely see that.
So in
Little
end,
scenario, no, he was actually creating an entity there, right in the middle of his drawing.
Yep.
Fraction of the fields, because that's really what is the crossing between the lines that defines the lines. So
you know, Rick, let me tell you something. In the Islamic book, if you want to save a person, you need to free a neck. That is the translation of the word. And
free
if
egg?
No, neck.
Free the neck?
Yeah, free a neck. Because before it was slavery, and if you free a person from slavery, that means you are making this free a neck. And they took it as a word. They didn't understand what the meaning and real thing. When you go to the neck, what is the thing, the most important thing in the neck? It is this one. So free this one. That's the mean. From the shackle of the body. Because here is the interaction between the soul and the the emotion and the body. Here, the soul interaction. This is the most important, I think, organ in the whole body. Because this one changed and delivers all, as Mr. Keshe said in his teaching, this one who is responsible to change all the fields to the what the body need, from calcium to potassium, from to all of this kind of energy. So there is a lot in this thing.
Oh, thanks for bringing that up, Jalal. Interesting.
I'm telling you, it's need only understanding. Everything is there, really, but it's due to our what we heritage from knowledge from our ancestors. That's all. We need to change all of that, and you will find it. It's everything is there.
Well, certainly we can find insights from our environment at any point in time when we wake up to it.
We are waking up.
And thanks for waking us up to that.
So Mario, your drawing is there, so no one interfere with your drawing.
No problem, Jalal. Thank you.
Okie dokie. I think it might be time to kind of wrap things up here, but if there's anybody else that wants to go ahead to further the knowledge here, feel free and we'll carry on.
Rick, that picture you showed of the dry lake bed, I found that. It looks like it's out of Canada, and they have a name for that picture. I can't get to that screen. But these are the wind fields creating that scape, let's say. That is so powerful if that wasn't photoshopped. And I guess it's just the field strength that dictates the human form. That's what I was getting out of it on this planet.
You have to look at the pictures, and I don't want to show the pictures until I know they're not copyright and so on, and I'm not prepared for that right now. So
No, I just wanted to discuss it for a moment.
yeah, it's just that people don't have a clue what we're talking about until they
Okay.
see pictures and so on. And
let me see if I can just go.
sorry, you cut out there. What happened?
No, I was just going to look for the name of the picture and people can find it on their own.
Sure, if you put a link in the chat, that would be good.
I don't know how to do that.
We'll just copy the link if you find a picture on the internet or whatever, and copy the link and paste it into the chat. Yeah, okay, well, wait for Mark to put his post in there. Is there anybody else that has something they'd like to bring up? Did have that video I was going to replay parts of, but I think we've probably had enough for today. Maybe I'll leave that for next week. Are you still looking for?
Yeah, I'll just have to pass on that right now.
Okay, well, maybe
it's a mountain in Canada. It's called the Indian's Head. It's actually a mountain, I think it said. I can't get the screens up at the same time so I could read it to you. Okay, we'll pass now.
Okay, let me just what happened here? Hello?
Yes.
Oh. What was that? Hello?
I just said yes.
Oh, I thought it was somebody else had said something there. And I see Gunther just come in as well. We're just about to end here, Gunther, I believe, unless you have a topic or a question that you'd like to bring up. Okay. All right, well, perhaps we will end it for now then. We've got a lot of conceptual stuff to sort of process over this little workshop here. Sometimes it helps to sleep on it, as they say, and one can attain more clarity just by allowing it to process overnight. I'm sure these topics will come up more as we continue on here, as they seem to periodically come up, and we go through it again to clarify each time, go a little deeper and a little further in our understanding. It's kind of like gold prospecting in a way, gold mining. Remove the overburden and keep getting closer to the bedrock.
Rick,
Okay. Yes.
are you really going to end?
Well, do you have something you would like to carry on with?
Look, this one make me crazy. This picture.
What do you mean by this?
Yeah. How the soul create interaction between emotion and physicality. Yes?
Oh, you mean the screen share? Okay, I was on a different screen here.
Come, guys, think with me, please. How the soul is created. Interaction between emotion and physicality. Yes?
The soul is created from the interaction between the
emotion part and physicality part.
Isn't it more the other way around? The physicality is created by the interaction of the soul through emotion?
I think Mr. Keshe explained that before.
Can I point out something about this? It's an ironic thing about how this works. You have the fields radiating out from the central core. They cross. It's their crossing that causes these Coulomb barriers to form and the entities life. But in turn, it's the fields crossing from these the creation, the created fields, the created entities are also crossing at the center core. So it's the act of these entities, fields crossing at the center creates the central core. It's the central core's radiate out of the fields that creates the created fields. So that my end is my beginning. In other words, the physicality or the emotions or whatever you want to call those next layers out, they are created because the central core is opened up and manifests itself. But the central core cannot exist except as being the interaction of the fields of the creation feeding back to it. So in other words, you can't have one without the other. And it can't be a linear time thing. You can't have first the central core and then the creation, because the creation is also creating the central core, right? There's nothing to feed back into the central core unless you already have the manifestation of the creation. So in a way, the physicality creates the soul creates the physicality. It's if you think of it like an electronic circuit, which is not electrons, it's plasma. It's a plasma circuit made of plasma. The circuit cannot flow unless it's already complete. If you have a broken circuit, the whole field collapses. So the circuit has to be flowing in order for the circuit to exist. But the circuit cannot flow unless the circuit already exists, see? So you have this sort of irony.
But you always know where your nose is going. You always know where the source is and where going away from source is, right?
You're talking about navigation. Yeah. Now you're talking about navigation.
Not really. I'm talking about that you say that it's all one thing and that the outer fields create the inner and the inner creates the outer and so on. But yet we always know what the source of the fields are. We can always...
the soul of the man. Yeah, because, well, it's the central communication hub that creates the flock of birds or the flock of fields that behaves as a single entity. So yes, the soul now is behaving as the central communication hub for every cell in your body, right? So when you wave your arm in the air, you're looking at like the equivalent of a flock of birds that are all behaving as a single entity, controlled by the central hub. So Yes, but each cell is its own flock of birds, so to speak. So you have a flock of birds inside a flock of birds inside a flock of birds. Every cell has got its own soul, but they're all linked at the central core of the soul of the man. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Go to the CO2 box, Mario.
Sorry, to a what?
CO2 box.
Yeah.
What you have?
Well, you have your field strength that's creating the magnetic field of the energy signature for the copper. I mean, for the carbon. And
whatever it is, what you making?
Well, I think you're not making anything. You're creating an environment where life forms. You're being a matchmaker.
Okay.
You're putting the thing with the copper, and then when the fields interact, they have a baby, which we call CO2, so to speak, right?
Whatever, CO2 or copper or whatever.
Right.
But
right.
what we are doing, interaction between two fields.
Right, and trying to make a mating, have them mate.
Okay, and what it's brought, it bring you a GANs. High level of matter. Or let's say origin of these two matters. Still, it's not yet. We are not going to the highest one, but to the two plates. Interaction between two of them make the condition to this gas to appear. Yes?
Yeah, okay.
It created from its own. Although these two plates in the origin is created from this interaction. So when Mr. Keshe said the soul start because of interaction of emotion and physicality, it's the same thing. Although they are coming from the same line. The emotion and physicality, in the origin, they came from interaction of fields. So we see here in this draw that the thyroid is interaction between two fields. The heart field and what is inside the brain. Is it the soul of emotion? And what's come out from this interaction, it's there in the middle. And it's the same thing if you take two ganses with different ratio, you will have the third from the interaction. And even if you take fields of that, field of one neutron with another neutron, you will get the interaction between them. It's always third one who is interact between two. And this is the important one. I don't know how to explain it, but it's too much, so many ideas in the head. But this one, this drawing make me wonder and make me remember all the things I learned before. Don't bother yourself, guys. But something to think about. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Jalal. Anybody like to add something to any of the last comments or something new?
I could be wrong, but I thought I heard Mr. Keshe say out in space, like Mr. Keshe might leave some energy there, and then this is the way souls are created. And then another entity leaves some energy there, and I leave some energy, and Rick leaves some energy. And then I thought he said, and again, there's so many teachings and so on, that that's how the soul is created in space.
Don't recall that exactly, but that's entirely possible.
I could be mixed up on that.
He did mention something about one of the, I think one of the aspects of being a creator is that you eventually create other souls.
Well, if you look at this soul here at the center, it's created 12 souls are here, and in the next layer, 12 souls, and 12 times 128 souls. And that's only in, one, 7 octaves. How many octaves? I mean, maybe, whatever. So, the essence of creation is creation. I mean, every time you have an interaction, this is hard for us to understand. But when you take two magnets and you put those Coulomb barriers together, you created a life form in between them. A third one, always. There's life at every level of existence. It might have a short lifespan relative to us, but it exists in the fields of the universe. It's still stored there. So every single interaction is life. Every time you have a feedback loop, you create life at every level. It's not just biological amino acids that we call life. It's any two magnetic fields that interact. Every time you have a feedback loop, you created a soul. Well, you haven't created a soul. You've created a condition where a soul is born, right? You're a matchmaker. That's what we're doing. We're inside the body. This would be this structure here, this drawing. That's the unicos. And these dots in here, imagine there's how many. You don't even really have to have that many. If you have 128 layers times 12, that's probably enough to have enough universes to cover our whole all of the unicos. However many there are, that's what they are. They're plasmas. They're life forms. And if you zoom into any universe, so our universe is maybe this one over here, and and if you zoom into that, you'll find it's got a soul, and it's a baby version of the whole thing. And our solar system is one of the crossings. It's a living entity, and our planet is a living entity. And we are the fields of the planet crossing with the sun based on the nitrogen, and all the rest of it. Every level is life. We're part of the living entity of the universe, of the unicos. How can it not be life? Nothing can exist that's not life, because it's part of the living energy of the universe. Everything is life, and it remembers. That's a interesting thing. It stores everything. Nothing is lost. So that's what else do you need for life? You have a soul that's created. You have this building up of layers, which we call growth, and you have memory. What else do you need? And even a magnet's alive. And two magnets interact, they have a baby. Oh, no, that's inanimate. Well, to us, it's inanimate, but there's fields are whizzing around. They have a metabolism. And, even to us, we can't touch the outer layer Coulomb barrier. But another magnet can. We say, oh, it's not tangible. Well, not to us, but to another magnet, it's tangible. So, every time, everything is life at every level. That is what Mr. Keshe has said, but it's hard to grasp for us, But we are the flower of life. We are the tree of life. We are in the Garden of Eden, so to speak. We are the Garden of Eden.
And that's why we're connected to the creator, because that original neutron, that huge neutron, which is still dividing, has created all of this. And it's all part of that original divisions, the other billions and trillions and quadrillions of divisions. It's all connected.
That's right. And you know how the synchronized metronomes, how they will connect to each other at a certain ratio beating. And whatever you have, that causes a feedback loop directly to the central communication hub. We have our own field strength that's got its own ratio to the creator. So we are actually directly in communication with the creator. We are not aware of it because we've filtered it out or whatever. We've forgotten it. But we are directly connected to the creator.
I don't want to use the word connected, Mario. We are part of it. You're it.
Well, yeah. But when I mean connected, I mean we are in communication with it. And it's like this 8-year-old girl said back when they had the MagRav units first came out. And there was a guy came on there. He had his MagRav unit connected for a month or several weeks or whatever, and he was getting results. And he was on there saying, I'm getting this many watts and this much savings on my electric bill this month and all. And then he says, and I think it was happening in real time, or he was relating something that had happened before. He says to Mr. Keshe on the workshop, he says, my 8-year-old daughter's saying the MagRav unit's talking to her. And then he kind of laughs, ha, ha, ha. She's only 8 years old. And then he says, my 8-year-old daughter's saying, Daddy, it's talking to you too. Why aren't you hearing it? It's yelling at you. Why aren't you listening? Right? And he just went, ha, ha, ha. She's only 8 years old. What does she know? She's not old enough to know, I suppose, a MagRav unit cannot speak. Well, who's right and who's wrong there? 8-year-old girl can talk to her MagRav unit. Daddy knows better. So he can't. And it's yelling at her. And he can't. He's not listening. See? I find that very interesting, especially in the past few weeks. Mr. Keshe is talking about us relearning what we forgot when we were children, babies, that we could communicate at a universal level. And now we've forgotten that. And we use the words, I suppose, to lie to each other or whatever. But, the unit cost is talking to us. And if we don't hear it, it's our problem, not its problem. So just throw that in.
Gatwa said he had the same experience with his son, I think.
Yeah, that's right. And he still can't hear it either. And I had some communication, but I'm not, I can't change the color of my eyes. I'm still not mature enough, but at least if we are aware that that's what's going on, if we, we think in terms of particle physics, the MagRav unit's just particles, it's inanimate, it cannot speak, then you're not going to hear it. If you don't even recognize its existence as a life form, you think that might mess up your communication lines there, so to speak, right? So the first step is us realizing that we are part of a living entity that is memory. It's a memory circuit. It remembers everything and it communicates and it correlates. And we're the ones that are out of sync, so to speak, right? We're not hearing it. So first step is understanding, I suppose.
Okay, thanks, Mario. Anybody else like to weigh in at this point? Just checking the chats. Okay, so anything else before we wrap up for today? Going once, going twice. That's a wrap.
Thank you, Rick.
Okay, let me get my video back on to end it here. Alrighty, well, it's been another session of the Keshe Plasma Reactor Group for Wednesday, September 26, 2018. Another interesting session here today, and thank you for the input from several people. And it's all good food for thought and good food for being as well. You learn to be, then maybe we don't need so much thought. Meantime, keep making experiments, and maybe we can have some more practical examples of some of the theories that we bring up, just to remind people that there is some, what would you call it, physicality examples for the interaction of the fields that we talk about so much. It's hard to do sometimes because a lot of it is our feelings, our intuition, our the different set of interface than is easy to describe, let's say, or it just gets kind of difficult to put into the three-dimensional world sometimes. But it's all good, and I'm sure we'll have lots to show and tell as we go on here. So I'm looking forward to the Knowledge Seekers Workshop on Thursday. I know there'll be a couple of announcements that'll be fun for people. And so I encourage people to check that out, as usual, on 9 a.m. on Central European Time, Thursday morning, Central European Time. And what else do I need to say here? I should have made some sort of announcement. I can't remember what it is. I guess that's all for now. All right, so I'm going to end the live stream, and we'll see you all next time around at the Keshe Plasma Reactor Group. Okay, live stream shutting down. And we'll end the meeting.